Chapter 15a. An honest theft. Aubrey passed the 2 hours sitting upon his stool, without once moving. His mind was so active that it kept his body at rest. At the appointed hour the turnkey came down, renewed the water, and changed the bread. This was what, in Châtelet parlance, was called a dinner. The student remembered what the dying man told him, that the door of his cell would be open but once in the 24 hours. However, he still remained for a long while in the same place, absolutely motionless, fearing lest the event that had just occurred should cause some change in the routine of the prison. He soon observed, through his air hole, that it was beginning to grow dark. The day just past had been a well-filled day for him. In the morning, the examination by the magistrate. At noon, the duel with Marmain. At 1 o'clock, lodged in prison. At 3, the prisoner's death, and now his first attempts at securing his freedom. A man does not pass many such days in his life. Jack Aubrey rose at last, and walked to the door to listen for footsteps. Then, in order that the dirt and the wall might leave no marks upon his doublet, he removed that portion of his costume, pulled the bed away from the corner, and found the opening of which his companion had spoken. He crawled like a snake into the narrow gallery, which was some 8 feet deep, and which, after making a dip under the partition wall, ascended on the other side. As soon as he plunged his dagger into the earth, he knew by the sound that he would very soon accomplish his purpose, which was to open a passage into some place or other. What that place would be only a sorcerer could have told. He kept actively at work, making as little noise as possible. From time to time he went out of the excavation as a miner does, in order to scatter the loose earth about the floor of his cell. Otherwise it would eventually have blocked up the gallery. Then he would crawl back and set to work once more. While Aubrey was working, Ascanio was thinking sadly of Colombe. He too, as we have said, had been taken to the Châtelet. He too had been cast into a dungeon. But it may have been by chance, it may have been at the Duchess's suggestion. His quarters were a little less bare, consequently a little more habitable than the student's. But what did Ascanio care for a little more or a little less comfort? His dungeon was a dungeon all the same, his captivity a separation. He had not Colombe, who was more to him than light, or liberty, or life. Were Colombe with him in his dungeon, the dungeon would become an abode of bliss, a palace of enchantment. The poor child had been so happy during the days immediately preceding his arrest. Thinking of his beloved by day, and sitting by his side at night, he had never thought that his happiness might some day come to an end. And if, sometimes, in the midst of his felicity, the iron hand of doubt had clutched his heart, he had, like one threatened by danger from some unknown source, promptly put aside all uneasiness concerning the future, that he might lose none of his present bliss. And now he was in prison, alone, far from Colombe, who was perhaps in prison like himself, perhaps a prisoner in some convent, whence he could escape in no other way than by going to the chapel, where the husband whom they sought to force upon her awaited her. 2 redoubtable passions were standing guard at the cell doors: the love of Madame d'Etampes at Ascanio's, the ambition of Comte d'Orbec at Colombe's. As soon as he was alone in his dungeon, therefore, Ascanio became very sad and downhearted. His was one of those clinging natures which need the support of some robust organization. He was one of those slender, graceful flowers, which bend before the first breath of the tempest, and straighten up again only in the vivifying rays of the sun. Had Benvenuto been in his place, his first thought would have been to examine the doors, sound the walls, and stamp upon the floor, to see if one or the other would not afford his quick and combative mind some possible means of escape. But Ascanio sat down upon his bed, let his head fall upon his breast, and whispered Colombe's name. It never occurred to him that one could escape by any possible means from a dungeon behind 3 iron doors and surrounded by walls 6 feet thick. The dungeon was, as we have said, a little less bare and a little more habitable than that assigned to Yak. It contained a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and an old rush mat. Furthermore, a lamp was burning upon a stone projection, doubtless arranged for that purpose. Beyond question, it was a cell set apart for privileged prisoners. There was also a great difference in the matter of food. Instead of the bread and water which was brought to the student once a day, Ascanio enjoyed 2 daily repasts, a privilege somewhat neutralized by the consequent necessity of seeing the jailer twice in the 24 hours. These repasts, it should be said to the credit of the philanthropic administration of the Châtelet, were not altogether execrable. Ascanio thought but little of such paltry details. His was one of those delicate feminine organizations which seem to exist on perfume and dew. Without awaking from his reverie, he ate a hit of bread, drank a few drops of wine, and continued to think of Colombe and of Benvenuto Cellini, of Colombe as of her to whom all his love was given, of Cellini as of him in whom lay all his hope. Indeed, up to that moment Ascanio had never been concerned with any of the caves or details of existence. Benvenuto lived for both, and Ascanio was content to breathe, to dream of some lovely work of art, and to love Colombe. He was like the fruit which grows upon a sturdy tree, and draws all its life from the tree. And even now, perilous as was his situation, if he could have seen Benvenuto Cellini at the moment of his arrest or at the moment of his incarceration, and Benvenuto had said to him, with a warm grasp of his hand, "Have no fear, Ascanio, for I am watching over you in Colombe," his confidence in the master was so great that, relying upon that promise alone, he would have waited without anxiety for the prison doors to be thrown open, sure that thrown open they would be, in spite of bars and locks. But he had not seen Benvenuto, and Benvenuto did not know that his cherished pupil, the son of his Stefana, was a prisoner. It would have taken a whole day to carry the intelligence to him at Fontainebleau, assuming that it had occurred to anyone to do it, another day to return to Paris, and in 2 days the enemies of the lovers might gain a long lead upon their defender. So it was that Ascanio passed the rest of the day and the whole of the night following his arrest without sleep, sometimes pacing back and forth in his cell, sometimes sitting down, and occasionally throwing himself upon the bed, which was provided with white sheets, a special mark of favor which proved that Ascanio had been particularly commended to the attention of the authorities. During that day and night and the following morning nothing worthy of note occurred, unless it was a regular visit of the jailer to bring his food. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as nearly as a prisoner could judge by his reckoning of the time, he thought that he heard voices near at hand. It was a dull, indistinct murmur, but evidently caused by the vocal organs of human beings. Ascanio listened and walked toward the point whence the sound seemed to come. It was at one of the corners of his cell. He silently put his ear to the wall and to the ground, and found that the voices apparently came from beneath the floor. It was evident that he had neighbors who were separated from him only by a thin partition or an equally thin floor. After some 2 hours the sound ceased, and all was still once more. Toward night the noise began again, but this time it was of a different nature. It was not that which would be made by 2 persons speaking together, but consisted of dull, horrid blows as of some one cutting stone. It came from the same place, did not cease for a second, and seemed to come nearer and nearer. Absorbed as Ascanio was in his own thoughts, this noise seemed to him deserving of some attention nonetheless. So he sat with his eyes glued to the spot whence it came. He judged that it must be near midnight, but he did not once think of sleeping, notwithstanding that he had not slept for so many hours. The noise continued. As it was long past the usual hour for work, it was evidently some prisoner seeking to escape. Ascanio smiled sadly at the thought that the poor devil, who would think for a moment, mayhap, that he was at liberty, would find that he had simply changed his cell. At last the noise approached so near that Ascanio ran and seized his lamp, and returned with it to the corner. Almost at the same moment the earth rose up in that spot, and as it fell away disclosed a human head. Ascanio uttered an exclamation of wonder, followed by a cry of joy, to which a no less delighted cry made answer. The head belonged to Jacques Aubry. In an instant, thanks to the assistance rendered by Ascanio to the unexpected visitor who made his appearance in such extraordinary fashion, the 2 friends were in one another's arms. As will readily be conceived, the first questions and answers were somewhat incoherent, but at last, after exchanging a few disconnected exclamations, they succeeded in restoring some semblance of order to their thoughts and in casting some light upon recent events. Ascanio, to be sure, had almost nothing to say and everything to learn. Eventually Aubry told him the whole story, how he had returned to the hotel to nestle simultaneously with Benvenuto, how they had learned almost at the same moment of the arrest of Ascanio and the abduction of Colombe, how Benvenuto had rushed off to his studio like a madman, shouting, to the casting, and he, Aubry, to the Châtelet, Of what had taken place at the Hotel de Nesle since that time, the student could tell him nothing. But to the general narrative of the Iliad succeeded the private adventures of Ulysses. Aubrey described to Ascanio his disappointment at his failure to get committed to prison, his visit to Gervase, and a denunciation of him to the lieutenant criminal. His terrible examination, which had no other result than the paltry fine of 20 Paris sous, a result most insulting to the honor of Gervase, and finally his encounter with Mamane just as he was beginning to despair of procuring his own incarceration. From that point, he related everything that had happened to him up to the moment when, utterly in the dark as to what cell he was about to enter, he had thrust his head through the last crust of earth and discerned by the light of his lamp his friend Ascanio. Whereupon the friends once more embraced with great heartiness. "Now," said Jack Aubrey, "listen to me, Ascanio, for there is no time to lose." "But first of all," said Ascanio, "tell me of Colombe. Where is Colombe?" "Colombe? I can't tell you. With Madame d'Etampes, I think." "With Madame d'Etampes," cried Ascanio, "her rival. So what they say of the Duchess's love for you is true, is it?" Ascanio blushed and stammered some unintelligible words. "Oh, you needn't blush for that," cried Aubrey. "Deuce take me! A duchess, and a duchess who's the king's mistress at that. I should never have any such luck. But let us come back to business." "Yes," said Ascanio, "let us come back to Colombe." "Bah! I'm not talking about Colombe. I'm talking about a letter." "What letter?" "A letter the Duchesse d'Etampes wrote you." "Who told you that I have a letter from the Duchesse d'Etampes in my possession?" "Benvenuto Cellini." "Why did he tell you that?" "Because he must have that letter, because it is absolutely essential that he should have it, because I agreed to take it to him, because all I have done was done to get possession of that letter." "But for what purpose does Benvenuto want the letter?" "Ah, faith, I've no idea, and it doesn't concern me. He said to me, 'I must have that letter.' I said to him, 'Very good, I will get it for you.' I have had myself put in prison in order to get it. So give it me, and I agree to deliver it to Benvenuto. Well, what's the matter?" This last question was induced by the cloud which spread over Ascanio's face. "The matter is, my poor Aubrey," said he, "that your trouble is thrown away." "How so?" cried Aubrey. "Haven't you the letter still?" "It is here," said Ascanio, placing his hand upon the pocket of his doublet. "Ah, that's well. Give it to me, and I will take it to Benvenuto. That letter will never leave me, Jack." "Why so?" "Because I don't know what use Benvenuto proposes to make of it. He means to use it to save you, and to crush the Duchesse d'Etampes. It may be. Aubrey, I will not help to ruin a woman. But this woman seeks to ruin you. This woman detests you. No, I am wrong. She adores you. And you would have me in return for that feeling. Why, it's exactly the same as if she hated you since you don't love her. Besides, it's she who has done all this." "What?" "She who has done it." "Why, yes, it was you who caused your arrest and carried off Colombe." "Who told you that?" "No one. But who else could it have been?" "Why, the provost, or Dorbeck, or Mamane, to whom you admit that you told the whole story." "Ascanio! Ascanio!" cried Jack in despair. "You are destroying yourself." "I prefer to destroy myself rather than do a dastardly deed, Aubrey. But this is no dastardly deed, for Benvenuto is the one who undertakes to do it." "Listen to me, Aubrey," said Ascanio, "and don't be angry at what I say. If Benvenuto stood in your place and should say to me, 'It was Madame d'Etampes, your enemy, who caused your arrest, who carried off Colombe, who now has her in her power and intend to force her to do what she does not wish to do. I cannot save Colombe unless I have that letter. I would make him swear that he would not show it to the king, and then I would give it to him. But Benvenuto is not here, and I am not certain that it is a duchess who is persecuting me. This letter would not be safe in your hands. Aubrey, forgive me, but you yourself admit that you are an errant chatterbox. I promise you, Ascanio, that the day I have just passed has aged me 10 years. You may lose a letter, or, with the best intentions, I know, make an injudicious use of it, Aubrey, so the letter will remain where it is. But, my dear fellow, cried Jack, remember that Benvenuto himself said that nothing but this letter can save you. Benvenuto will save me without that. Aubrey, Benvenuto has the king's word that he will grant him whatever favor he asks on the day that his Jupiter is safely cast. When you thought that Benvenuto was going mad because he shouted, to the casting, he was beginning to rescue me. But suppose the casting should be unsuccessful, said Aubrey. There is no danger, rejoined Ascanio with a smile. But that sometimes happens to the most skillful founders in France, so I am told. The most skillful founders in France are mere schoolboys compared to Benvenuto. But how much time is required for the casting? 3 days. And how much more before the statue can be put before the king? 3 days more. 6 or 7 days in all. And suppose Madame d'Etampes forces Colombe to marry Dorbeck within 6 days. Madame d'Etampes has no power over Colombe. Colombe will resist. Very true. But the provost has power over Colombe as his daughter, and King Francois I has power over Colombe as his subject. Suppose the provost and the king both order her to marry him. Ascanio became frightfully pale. Suppose that when Benvenuto demands your liberty, Colombe is already the wife of another. What will you do with your liberty then? Ascanio passed one hand across his brow to wipe away the cold sweat which the student's words caused to start thereon, while with the other hand he felt in his pocket for the precious letter. But just as Aubrey felt certain that he was on the point of yielding, he shook his head as if to banish all irresolution. No, he said. No. No one save Benvenuto. Let us talk of something else. These words he uttered in a tone which indicated that, for the moment at least, it was useless to insist. In that case, said Aubrey, apparently forming a momentous resolution, in that case, my friend, if we are to talk on other subject, we may as well do it tomorrow morning, or later in the day, for I am afraid we may remain here for some time. For my own part, I confess that I am worn out by my tribulations of the day and my labor tonight, and shall not be sorry for a little rest. Do you remain here, and I will go back to my own cell. When you want to see me again, do you call me? Meanwhile, spread this mat over the hole I have made, so that our communications may not be cut off. Good night. The night brings counsel, they say, and I hope that I shall find you more reasonable tomorrow morning. With that, and refusing to listen to the observations of Ascanio, who sought to detain him, Zack Aubrey plunged head first into his gallery and crawled back to his cell. Ascanio, meanwhile, following up the advice his friend had given him, dragged the mat into the corner of his cell as soon as the student's legs had disappeared. The means of communication between the two cells thereupon disappeared altogether. He then tossed his doublet upon one of the 2 chairs which, with the table and the lamp, constituted the furnishings of his apartment, stretched himself out upon the bed, and, overdone with fatigue as he was, soon fell asleep, his bodily weariness carrying the day over his mental torture. Aubrey, instead of following Ascanio's example, although he was quite as much in need of sleep as he, sat down upon his stool and began to reflect deeply, which, as the reader knows, was so entirely contrary to all his habits, that it was evident that he was meditating some grand stroke. The student's immobility lasted about 15 minutes, after which he rose slowly, and, with the step of a man whose irresolution is at an end for good and all, walked to the hole and crawled into it again, but this time with so much caution and so noiselessly, that, when he reached the other end and raised the mat, he was overjoyed to perceive that the operation had not aroused his friend. That was all that the student wished. With even greater caution than he had theretofore exhibited, he crept stealthily forth from his underground gallery, and approached with bated breath the chair on which Ascanio's doublet lay. With one eye fixed upon the sleeping youth, and his ears on the alert for the slightest sound, he took from the pocket the precious letter so eagerly coveted by Cellini, and placed in the envelope a note from Gervase, which he folded in exactly the same shape as the Duchess's letter, sure that Ascanio would believe, so long as he did not open it, that lovely and D'Halley's missive was still in his possession. As silently as ever he stole back to the Met, raised it, crawled into the hole once more, and disappeared like the phantoms who sink through trapdoors at the opera. It was high time, for he was no sooner back in his cell than he heard Ascanio's door grinding on its hinges, and his friend's voice crying, in the tone of one suddenly aroused from sleep. "Who's there?" "I," responded a soft voice. "Do not be afraid, for it is a friend." Ascanio, who was but half-dressed, rose at the sound of the voice, which he seemed to recognize, and saw by the light of his lamp a veiled woman standing by the door. She slowly approached him and raised a veil. He was not mistaken. It was Madame d'Etampes. Chapter 16, wherein it is proved that a grisette's letter, when it is burned, makes as much flame and ashes as a duchess's. There was upon indeed Harley's mobile features an expression of sadness mingled with compassion, which deceived Ascanio completely and confirmed him, even before she had opened her mouth, in the impression that she was entirely innocent of any share in the catastrophe of which he and Colombe were victims. "You hear, Ascanio," she said in a melodious voice. "You, to whom I would have given a palace to live in, I find in a prison." "Ah, madam," cried the youth, "it is true, is it not, that you know nothing of the persecution to which we are subjected?" "Did you suspect me for an instant, Ascanio," said the Duchess, "in that case you have every reason to hate me, and I can only bewail in silence my fortune in being so little known to him I know so well." "No, madam, no," said Ascanio. "I was told that you were responsible for it all, but I refuse to believe it." "'T was well done of you. Ascanio, you do not love me, but with you hatred at least is not synonymous with injustice. You were right, Ascanio. Not only am I not responsible for it, but I knew nothing whatever about it. It was a provost, Messiah d'Estaville. He learned the whole story, I know not how, told it all to the king, and obtained from him the order to arrest you and recover Colombe." "And Colombe is with her father?" demanded Ascanio eagerly. "No, Colombe is with me." "With you, madam?" cried the young man. "Why with you?" "She is very lovely, Ascanio," murmured the Duchess, "and I can understand why you prefer her to all the women in the world, even though the most loving of them all offers you the richest of duchies." "I love Colombe, madam," said Ascanio, "and you know that love, which is a treasure sent from heaven, is to be preferred to all earthly treasures." "Yes, Ascanio, yes, you love her above everything. For a moment I hoped that your passion for her was only a passing fancy. I was mistaken. Yes, I realize now," she added with a sigh, "that to keep you apart any longer would be to run counter to God's will." "Ah, madam," cried Ascanio, clasping his hands, "God has placed in your hands the power to bring us together. Be noble and generous to the end, madam, and make 2 children happy who will love you and bless you all their lives." "Yes," said the Duchess, "I am vanquished, Ascanio. Yes, I am ready to protect and defend you. But alas, it may be too late even now." "Too late? What do you mean?" cried Ascanio. "It may be, Ascanio, it may be that at this moment I am lost myself." "Lost? Madam, how so, in God's name?" "For having loved you. For having loved me. You, lost because of me. Yes, imprudent creature that I am, lost because of you, lost because I wrote to you." "How so? I do not understand you. Madam, you do not understand that the provost, armed with an order from the king, has directed a general search to be made at the Hotel de Nesle? You do not understand that this search, the principal purpose of which is to find proofs of your affair with Colombe, will be most rigorously carried out in your bedroom." "What then?" demanded Ascanio impatiently. "Why," continued the Duchess, "if they find that letter, which in a moment of frenzy I wrote to you, if it is recognized as mine, if it is laid before the king, whom I was then deceiving, and whom I was willing to betray for you, do you not understand that my power is at an end from that moment? Do you not understand that I can then do nothing either for you or for Colombe? Do you not understand, in short, that I am lost?" "Oh," cried Ascanio, "have no fear. Madam, there is no danger of that. The letter is here. It has never left me." The Duchess breathed freely once more, and the expression of her face changed from anxiety to joy. "It has never left you, Ascanio," she repeated. "It has never left you. To what sentiment, pray tell me, do I owe the fact that fortunate letter has never left you?" "To prudence, madam," murmured Ascanio. "Prudence! Mon Dieu! Mon Dieu! I am wrong once more, and yet I surely should be convinced ere this. Prudence! Ah, well," she added, seeming to make a powerful effort to restrain her feelings. "In that case, as I have naught but your prudence to thank, Ascanio, do you think it very prudent to keep it upon your person, when it may come to your cell at any moment and search you by force? Do you think it prudent, I say, to keep a letter which, if it is found, will put the only person who can save you in Colombe in a position where it will be impossible for her to help you?" "Madam," said Ascanio, in his melodious voice, and with that tinge of melancholy which all pure hearts feel when they are forced to doubt, "I know not if the purpose to save Colombe and myself exists at the bottom of your heart as it does upon your lips. I know not whether the desire to see that letter again, and nothing more, is the motive of your visit to me. I know not whether, as soon as you have it in your possession, you may not lay aside this role of protectress which you have assumed, and become our enemy once more. But this I do know, madam, that the letter is yours, that it belongs to you, and at the moment you claim it I cease to have the right to keep it from you." Ascanio rose, went straight to the chair upon which his doublet lay, put his hand in the pocket, and took out a letter, the envelope of which the Duchess recognized at a glance. "Here, madam," he said, "is a paper you are so anxious to possess, and which can be of no use to me, while it may injure you seriously. Take it, tear it up, destroy it. I have done my duty. You may do what you choose." "Ah, yours is indeed a noble heart, Ascanio," cried the Duchess, acting in obedience to one of those generous impulses which are sometimes found in the most corrupt hearts. "Someone comes." "Madam, take care," cried Ascanio. "True," said the Duchess. At the sound of approaching footsteps, she hastily thrust the paper into the flame of the lamp, which consumed it in an instant. The Duchess did not let it drop until the flame had almost scorched her fingers, when the letter, 3/4 consumed, drifted slowly downward. When it reached the floor, it was entirely reduced to ashes, but the Duchess was not content until she had placed her foot upon them. At that moment the provost appeared in the doorway. "I was told that you were here, madam," he said, looking uneasily from the Duchess to Ascanio, "and I hasten to descend and place myself at your service. Is there aught in which I, or they who are under my orders, can be of any use to you?" "No, Messiah," she replied, unable to conceal the feeling of intense joy which overflowed from her heart upon her face. "No, but I am none the less obliged to you for your readiness and your goodwill. I came simply to question this young man whom you arrested, and to ascertain if he is really as guilty as he was said to be." "And what is your conclusion?" queried the provost, in a tone to which he could not refrain from imparting a slight tinge of irony. "That Ascanio is less guilty than I thought. I beg you, therefore, Messiah, to show him every consideration in your power. The poor child is in wretched quarters. Could you not give him a better room? We will look to it tomorrow, madam, for you know that your wishes are commands to me. Have you any other commands? And do you wish to continue your examination?" "No, Messiah," was the reply. "I know all that I wish to know." With that the Duchess left the dungeon, darting at Ascanio a parting glance of mingled gratitude and passion. The provost followed her, and the door closed behind them. "Pardieu," muttered Jack Aubrey, who had not lost a word of the conversation between the Duchess and Ascanio. "Pardieu, it was time." It had been Marmaine's first thought on recovering consciousness to send word to the Duchess that he had received a wound which might well prove to be mortal, and that before he breathed his last he desired to impart to her a secret of the deepest moment. Upon receipt of that message, the Duchess hastened to his side. Marmaine then informed her that he had been attacked and wounded by a certain student named Jack Aubrey, who was endeavoring to gain admission to the Châtelet in order to get speech of Ascanio and carry to Cellini a letter that was in Ascanio's possession. The Duchess needed to hear no more, and, bitterly cursing the passion which had led her once more to overstep the limits of her ordinary prudence, she hurried to the Châtelet, although it was 2 o'clock in the morning, demanded to be shown to Ascanio's cell, and there enacted the scene we have described, which had ended in accordance with her wishes so far as she knew, although Ascanio was not altogether deceived. As Jacques Aubry said, it was high time, but only half of his task was accomplished, and the most difficult part remained to do. He had the letter which had come so near being destroyed forever, but in order that it should have its full effect, it must be in Cellini's hands, not in Jacques Aubry's. Now Jacques Aubry was a prisoner, very much a prisoner, and he had learned from his predecessor that it was no easy matter to get out of the châtelet once one was safely lodged therein. He was therefore, we might say, in much the same plight as the rooster who found the pearl, greatly perplexed as to the use to be made of his treasure. To attempt to escape by resorting to violence would be utterly vain. He might with his dagger kill the keeper who brought his food and take his keys and his clothes. But not only was that extreme method repugnant to the student's kindly disposition, it did not afford sufficiently strong hopes of success. There were 10 chances to 1 that he would be recognized, searched, relieved of his precious letter, and thrust back into his cell. To attempt to escape by cunning was even less hopeful. The dungeon was 8 or 10 feet underground. There were huge iron bars across the air-hole through which the one faint ray of light filtered into his cell. It would take months to loosen one of those bars, and, suppose one of them to be removed, where would the fugitive then find himself? In some courtyard with insurmountable walls, where he would inevitably be found the next morning. Bribery was his only remaining resource. But, as a consequence of the sentence pronounced by the lieutenant criminal, whereby Gervais was awarded 20 pair sous for the loss of her honor, the prisoner's whole fortune was reduced to 10 pair sous, a sum utterly inadequate to tempt the lowest jail of the vilest prison, and which could not decently be offered to the turnkey of a royal fortress. Jacques Aubry was therefore, we are forced to confess, in the direst perplexity. From time to time it seemed as if a hopeful idea passed through his mind, but it was evident that it was likely to entail serious consequences, for each time that it returned, with a persistence characteristic of hopeful ideas, Aubry's face grew perceptibly darker, and he heaved deep sighs, which proved that the poor fellow was undergoing an internal conflict of the most violent description. This conflict was so violent and so prolonged that Aubry did not once think of sleep the whole night long. He passed the time in striding to and fro, in sitting down and standing up. It was the first time that he had ever kept vigil all night for purposes of reflection. His previous experiences in that line had been on convivial occasions only. At daybreak the struggle seemed to have ended in the complete triumph of one of the opposing forces, for Jacques heaved a more heartbreaking sigh than any he had yet achieved, and threw himself upon his bed like a man completely crushed. His head had hardly touched the pillow when he heard steps on the staircase. The key grated in the lock. The door turned upon its hinges, and 2 officers of the law appeared in the doorway. They were the lieutenant criminal and his clerk. The annoyance of the visit was tempered by the student's gratification in recognizing 2 old acquaintances. "Aha, my fine fellow," said the magistrate, recognizing Aubry. "So it's you, is it? And you succeeded after all in getting into the châtelet? True to you. What a rake you are. You seduce young women and run young noblemen through the body. But beware. A nobleman's life is more expensive than a grisette's honor, and you will not be quit of this affair for 20 pair sous." Alarming as the worthy magistrate's words undoubtedly were, the tone in which he uttered them reassured the prisoner to some extent. This jovial-faced individual, into whose hands he had had the good luck to fall, was such a good fellow to all appearance that it was impossible to think of him in connection with anything deadly. To be sure, it was not the same with his clerk, who nodded his head approvingly at each word that fell from his principal's lips. It was the second time that Jacques Aubry had seen the 2 men side by side, and, deeply engrossed as he was by his own precarious situation, he could not forbear some internal reflections upon the whimsical chance which had coupled together 2 beings so utterly opposed to each other in character and feature. The examination began. Jacques Aubry made no attempt at concealment. He declared that, having recognized the Vicomte de Mamain as a man who had on several occasions betrayed his confidence, he seized his page's sword and challenged him, that Mamain had accepted the challenge, and that after exchanging a few thrusts the Viscount fell. More than that he did not know. "You know no more than that. You know no more than that," muttered the judge. "Faith, I should say that was quite enough, and your affair is as clear as day, especially as the Vicomte de Mamain is one of Madame d'Etampes' great favorites." So it seems that she has complained of you to the higher powers. My boy. The devil, exclaimed the scholar, beginning to feel decidedly ill at ease. Tell me, Monsieur le Juge, is the affair so bad as you say? Worse, my dear friend, worse? I am not in the habit of frightening those who come before me, but I give you warning of this, so that if you have any arrangements to make— Arrangements to make, cried the student. Tell me, Monsieur le Lieutenant Criminal, for God's sake, do you think my life's in danger? Certainly it is. Certainly. What? You attack a nobleman in the street, you force him to fight, you run a sword through him, and then you ask if your life's in danger. Yes, my dear friend, yes, in very great danger. But such affairs happen every day, and I don't see that the guilty ones are prosecuted. True, among gentlemen, my young friend. Oh, when it pleases two gentlemen to cut each other's throats, it's a privilege of their rank, and the king has nothing to say. But if the common people take it into their head some fine day to fight with gentlemen, as they are 20 times as numerous, there would soon be no more gentlemen, which would be a great pity. How many days do you think my trial will last? 5 or 6, in all likelihood. What? Cried the student. 5 or 6 days. No more than that. Why should it? The facts are clear enough. A man dies. You confess that you killed him, and justice is satisfied. However, added the judge, assuming a still more benevolent expression, if 2 or 3 days more would be agreeable to you. Very agreeable. Oh, well, we will spin out the report and gain time in that way. You are a good fellow at heart, and I shall be delighted to do something for you. Thanks, said the student. And now, said the judge, rising, have you any further request to make? I would like to see a priest. Is it impossible? No, it is your right. In that case, Monsieur le Juge, ask them to send one to me. I will do your errand. No ill will, my young friend. Good luck. On the contrary, I am deeply grateful. Master student, said the clerk in an undertone, stepping to Aubrey's side, would you be willing to do me a favor? Gladly, said Aubrey. What might it be? It may be that you have friends or relatives to whom you intend to bequeath all your possessions. Friends? I have but one, and is a prisoner like myself. Relatives? I have only cousins, and very distant cousins at that. So, say on, Master Clerk, say on. Monsieur, I am a poor man, father of a family, with 5 children. What then? I have never had any opportunities in my position, which I feel, as you can testify, with scrupulous probity. All my confrères are promoted over my head. Why is that? Why? Why? I will tell you. Do so. Because they are lucky. Aha! And why are they lucky? That's what I would ask you, Master Clerk. And that's what I'm about to tell you, Master Student. I shall be very glad to know. They are lucky. Here the clerk lowered his voice a half-tone more. They are lucky because they have the rope a man was hanged with in their pocket. Do you understand? No. You're rather dull. You will make a will. A will. Why should I? Dame, so that there may be no contest among your A's. Very good. Write in your will that you authorize Marc Boniface Grimmonot, cleric to Monsieur le Lieutenant Criminal, to claim from the executioner a hit of the rope you are hanged by. Ah, said Aubrey, in a choking voice. Yes, now I understand. And you will grant my request. To be sure. Young man, remember what you have promised me. Many have made the same promise, but some have died intested. Others have written my name, Marc Boniface Grimmonot, so badly that there was a chance of cavilling, and others still, who were guilty, monsieur, on my word of honor very guilty, have been acquitted and gone off elsewhere to be hanged, so that I was really in despair when you fell in my way. Very well, Master Cleric, very well. If I am hanged, you shall have what you want, never fear. Oh, you will be, monsieur, you will be, don't you doubt it. Well, Grimono, said the judge. Here I am, monsieur. Here I am. So it's a bargain, master student. It's a bargain. On your word of honor. On my word. I think that I shall get it at last, muttered the clerk as he withdrew. I will go home and tell my wife and children the good news. He left the cell on the heels of the lieutenant criminal, who was grumbling good-humoredly at having to wait so long. Chapter 17, wherein it is proved that true friendship is capable of carrying devotion to the marrying point. Aubrey, once more alone, was soon more deeply absorbed in thought than before, and the reader will agree that there was ample food for thought in his conversation with the lieutenant criminal. We hasten to say, however, that one who could have read his thoughts would have found that the situation of Ascanio and Colombe, depending as it did upon the letter in his possession, occupied the first place, and that before thinking of himself, a thing which he proposed to do in good time, he deliberated as to what was to be done for them. He had been meditating thus for half an hour more or less, when the door of his cell opened once more, and the turnkey appeared on the threshold. "Are you the man who sent for a priest?" he growled. "To be sure I am," said Jack. "Deuce take me, if I know what they all want with a damned monk," muttered the turnkey. "But what I do know is that they can't leave a poor man in peace for 5 minutes. Come in, father," he continued, standing aside to allow the priest to pass, "and be quick about it." With that he closed the door, still grumbling, and left the newcomer alone with the prisoner. "Was it you sent for me, my son?" the priest asked. "Yes, father," replied the student. "Do you wish to confess?" "No, not just that. I wish to talk with you concerning a simple case of conscience." "Say on, my son," said the priest, seating himself upon the stool, "and if any feeble light that I can give you will help you. It was to ask your advice that I ventured to send for you." "I am listening." "Father," said Aubrey, "I am a great sinner." "Alas," said the priest, "happy is the man who acknowledges it. But that is not all. Not only am I a great sinner myself, as I said, but I have led others into sin. Is there any way of undoing the harm you have done?" "I think so. Father, I think so. She whom I dragged with me into the pit was an innocent young girl." "You seduced her, did you?" "Seduced? Yes, father, that is the word. And you wish to atone for your sin. That at least is my intention. There is but one way to do it. I know it well, and that is why I have been undecided so long. If there were 2 ways, I would have chosen the other." "You wish to marry her?" "One moment. No, I will not lie. No, father, I do not wish to do it, but I am resigned. A warmer, more devoted feeling would be much better." "What would you have, father?" "There are people who are born to marry, and others to remain single. Celibacy was my vocation, and nothing less than my present situation, I swear." "Very well, my son. The sooner the better, as you may repent of your virtuous intentions. What will be the earliest possible moment?" Aubrey asked. "Dame," said the priest, "as it is a marriage in extremis, there will be no difficulty about the necessary dispensations, and I think that by day after tomorrow." "Day after tomorrow let it be," said the student with a sigh. "But the young woman, what of her? Will she consent?" "To what?" "To the marriage." "Pardieu, will she consent?" "That she will, with thanks. Such propositions aren't made to her every day." "Then there's no obstacle?" "None." "Your parents?" "Absent." "And hers?" "Unknown." "Her name?" "Gervase Perrette Popinot." "Do you wish me to tell her of your purpose?" "If you will kindly take that trouble, father, I shall be truly grateful." "She shall be informed this very day." "Tell me, father, tell me, could you possibly hand her a letter?" "No, my son. We who are admitted to minister to the prisoners have sworn to deliver no message for them to any person until after their death. When that time comes, I will do whatever you choose." "Thanks. It would be useless. Marriage it must be, then," muttered Aubrey. "You have nothing else to say to me?" Nothing, except that, if you doubt the truth of what I say, and if she makes any objection to granting my request, you will find in the office of the lieutenant criminal a complaint lodged by said Gervais Barrett Popinot, which will prove that what I have said is the exact truth. Rely upon me to smooth away all obstacles, replied the priest, who realized that Yak's proposed action was not prompted by enthusiasm for the marriage, but that he was yielding to necessity. And 2 days hence, you will have restored honor to the woman whose honor you took from her. Alas, muttered the student with a deep sigh. Aye, my son, said the priest, the more sacrifice costs you, the greater pleasure it affords to God. By Mahomet's belly, cried Jack, in that case God should be very grateful to me. Go, father, go. Indeed, Yak had had to overcome very bitter opposition in his own mind before arriving at such a resolution. As he had told Gervais, he had inherited his antipathy to the marriage tie from his father, and nothing less than his friendship for Ascanio, and the thought that it was he who had caused his ruin, together with the incentive afforded by the noblest examples of self-sacrifice and devotion to be found in history. Nothing less than all of this was necessary to bring him to the pitch of abnegation at which he had now arrived. But the reader may ask, where lies the connection between the marriage of Gervais and Aubry, and the happiness of Ascanio and Colombe, and how did Aubry expect to save his friend by marrying his mistress? To such a question I can only answer that the reader lacks penetration, to which the reader may retort, to be sure, that it is not his business to have that quality. In that case, I beg him to take the trouble to read the end of this chapter, which he might have passed over had he been endowed with a more subtle intellect. When the priest had gone, Aubry, recognizing the impossibility of drawing back, seemed to become more tranquil. It is characteristic of resolutions, even the most momentous, to bring tranquility in their wake. The mind which has wrestled with its perplexity is at rest. The heart which has fought against its sorrow is, as it were, benumbed. Yak remained passive in his cell until, having heard sounds in it occupied by Ascanio, which is supposed to be caused by the entrance of the jailer with his breakfast, he concluded that they would surely be left in peace for a few hours. He waited some little time after the noise had ceased, then crawled into his underground gallery, passed through it, and raised the mat with his head. Ascanio's cell was plunged in most intense darkness. Aubry called his friend's name in a low tone, but there was no reply. The cell was untenanted. Aubry's first feeling was one of joy. Ascanio was free, and if Ascanio was free, there was no need for him to. But almost immediately he remembered what was said the night before about providing him with better quarters. It was plain that the suggestion of Madame d'Etampes had been heeded, and the sounds he heard were caused by his friends being moved. Aubry's hope was as dazzling, therefore, but as evanescent as a flash of lightning. He let the mat fall and crawled backward into his cell. Every source of consolation was taken from him, even the presence of the friend for whom he had sacrificed himself. He had no resource left but reflection. But he had already reflected so long, and his reflections had led to such a disastrous result, that he preferred to sleep. He threw himself upon his bed, and as he was very much in arrears in the matter of sleep, it was not long before he was entirely unconscious of his surroundings, notwithstanding the perturbed condition of his mind. He dreamed that he was condemned to death and hanged, but through the deviltry of the hangman, the rope was badly greased, and his neck was not broken. He was buried in due form, none the less, and in his dream was beginning to gnaw his arms, as men buried alive always do, when the clerk, determined to have his bit of rope, came to secure it, opened the coffin in which he was immured, and restored his life and liberty. Alas, it was only a dream, and when the student awoke his life was still in great danger, and his liberty altogether non-existent. The evening, the night, and the next day passed away, and brought him no other visitor than his jailer. He tried to ask him a few questions, but could not extract a word from him. In the middle of the second night, as Yak was in the midst of his first sleep, he was awakened with a start by the grinding of his door upon its hinges. However soundly a prisoner may be sleeping, the sound of an opening door always awakens him. The student sat up in bed. "Up with you, and dress yourself," said the jailer's harsh voice, and Aubry could see by the light of the torch he held the halberds of 2 of the provost guards behind him. The second branch of his order was unnecessary, As the student's bed was entirely unprovided with bedclothes, he had lain down completely dressed. "Where do you propose to take me, pray?" demanded Jack, still asleep with one eye. "You are very inquisitive," said the jailer, "but I would like to know." Come, come, no arguing, but follow me." Resistance was useless, so the prisoner obeyed. The jailer walked first, then came Aubrey, and the two guards brought up the rear of the procession. Jack looked around with an inquietude which he did not seek to conceal. He feared a nocturnal execution, but one thing comforted him. He saw no priest or hangman. After a few moments, he found himself in the first room to which he was taken at the time of his coming to the prison. But instead of escorting him to the outer door, which he hoped for an instant that they would do, so prone to illusions does misfortune render one, his guide opened a door at one corner of the room and entered an inner corridor leading to a courtyard. The prisoner's first thought on entering the courtyard, where he felt the fresh air and saw the starlit sky, was to fill his lungs and lay in a stock of oxygen, not knowing when he might have another opportunity. The next moment he noticed the ogive windows of a 14th century chapel on the other side of the yard, and began to suspect what was in the wind. The truth-telling instinct of the historian compels us to state that, at the thought, his strength well nigh failed him. However, the memory of Ascanio and Colombe, and the grandeur of the self-sacrifice about to be consummated, sustained him in his distress. He walked with a firm step toward the chapel, and when he stood in the doorway everything was explained. The priest stood by the altar. In the choir a woman was waiting. The woman was Gervais. Halfway up the choir he met the governor of the Châtelet. "You desired to make reparation, before your death, to the young woman whose honor you stole from her. Your request was no more than just, and it is granted." A cloud passed over the student's eyes, but he put his hand over Madame d'Etampes' letter, and his courage returned. "Oh, my poor Yak," cried Gervais, throwing herself into the student's arms. "Oh, who could have dreamed that this hour which I have so longed for would strike under such circumstances?" "What wouldst thou have, my dear Gervais?" cried the student, receiving her upon his breast. "God knows those whom he should punish and those whom he should reward. We must submit to God's will. Take this," he added beneath his breath, slipping Madame d'Etampes' letter into her hand, "for Benvenuto and for him alone." "What's that?" exclaimed the governor, walking hastily toward them. "What's the matter?" "Nothing. I was telling Gervais how I love her." As she will not, in all probability, have time to ascertain the contrary, protestations are thrown away. Go to the altar and make haste. Aubrey and Gervais went forward in silence to the waiting priest. When they were in front of him, they fell upon their knees and the mass began. Yak would have been very glad of an opportunity to exchange a few words with Gervais, who, for a part, was burning up with a desire to express her gratitude to Aubrey, but two guards stood beside them listening to every word and watching every movement. It was very fortunate that a momentary feeling of sympathy led the governor to allow them to exchange the embrace under cover of which the letter passed from Yak's hands to Gervais. That opportunity lost, the close surveillance to which they were subjected would have rendered Jack's devotion of no avail. The priest had received his instructions, doubtless, for he cut his discourse very short. It may be, too, that he thought it would be trouble thrown away to enjoin due regard to his duties as a husband and father upon a man who was to be hanged within 2 or 3 days. The discourse at an end, the benediction given, the mass said, Aubrey and Gervais thought they would be allowed to speak together privately for a moment, but not so. Despite the tears of Gervais, who was literally dissolved in them, the guards forced them to part. They had time, however, to exchange a glance. Aubrey said, "Remember my commission." Gervais replied, "Never fear. It shall be done tonight or tomorrow at latest." Then they were led away in opposite directions. Gervais was politely escorted to the street door, and Jack was politely taken back to his cell. As the door closed upon him, he heaved a deeper sigh than any of those he had perpetrated since he entered the prison. He was married. Thus it was that Aubrey, like another Curtius, plunged headlong, through devotion, into the hymeneal gulf. Chapter 18, The Casting. Now, with our reader's permission, we will leave the Châtelet for a moment and return to the Hôtel de Nesle. The workmen responded quickly to Benvenuto's cries and followed him to the foundry. They all knew him as he appeared when at work, but never had they seen such an expression upon his face, never such a flame in his eyes. Whoever could have cast him in a mold at that moment, as he was on the point of casting his Jupiter, would have endowed the world with the noblest statue ever created by the genius of an artist. Everything was ready. The wax model in its envelope of clay, girt round with iron bands, was awaiting in the furnace which surrounded it the hour of its life. The wood was all arranged. Benvenuto set fire to it in 4 different places, and as it was spruce, which the artist had been long collecting that it might be thoroughly dry, the fire quickly attacked every part of the furnace, and the mold was soon the center of an immense blaze. The wax thereupon began to run out through the air holes while the mold was baking. At the same time, the workmen were digging a long ditch beside the furnace, into which the metal was to be poured in a state of fusion, for Benvenuto was anxious not to lose a moment, and to proceed to the casting as soon as the mold was thoroughly baked. For a day and a half the wax trickled from the mold. For a day and a half, while the workmen divided into watches and took turn and turn about like the sailors on a man-of-war, Benvenuto was constantly on hand, hovering about the furnace, feeding the fire, encouraging the workmen. At last he found that the wax had all run out, and that the mold was thoroughly baked. This completed the second part of his work. The last part was the melting of the bronze and the casting of the statue. When that stage was reached, the workmen, who were utterly unable to comprehend such superhuman strength and such an intensity of passion, endeavored to induce Benvenuto to take a few hours' rest. But that would mean so many hours added to Ascanio's captivity and the persecution of Colombe. Benvenuto refused. He seemed to be made of the same bronze of which he was about to make a god. When the ditch was dug, he wound stout ropes about the mold, and with the aid of windlasses prepared for that purpose, he raised it with every possible precaution, swung it out over the ditch, and let it down slowly until it was on a level with the furnace. He fixed it firmly in place there by piling around it the dirt taken from the ditch, treading it down, and putting in place, as the dirt rose about the mold, the pieces of earthen pipe, which were to serve as air-holes. All these preparations took the rest of the day. Night came. For 48 hours Benvenuto had not slept nor lain down, nor even sat down. The workmen implored, Scotsone scolded, but Benvenuto would hear none of it. He seemed to be sustained by some more than human power, and made no other reply to the entreaties and scolding than to assign to each workman his task, in the short, stern tone of an officer maneuvering his troops. Benvenuto was determined to begin the casting at once. The energetic artist, who was accustomed to see all obstacles yield before him, exerted his imperious power upon himself. He ordered his body to act, and it obeyed, while his companions were obliged to withdraw, one after another, as in battle-wounded soldiers leave the field and seek the hospital. The casting furnace was ready. It was filled with round ingots of brass and copper, symmetrically piled one upon another, so that the heat could pass between them, and the fusion be effected more quickly and more completely. He set fire to the wood around it as in the case of the other furnace, and as it was mostly spruce, the resin which exuded from it, in conjunction with the combustible nature of the wood, soon made such a fierce flame that it rose higher than was anticipated, and lapped the roof of the foundry, which took fire at once, being of wood. At the sight of this conflagration, and more especially at the heat which it gave forth, all the artist's comrades, save Hermann, drew back, but Hermann and Benvenuto were a host in themselves. Each of them seized an axe and cut away at the wooden pillars which upheld the roof, and in an instant it fell in. Thereupon Hermann and Benvenuto with poles pushed the burning fragments into the furnace, and with the increased heat the metal began to melt. But Benvenuto had at last reached the limit of his strength. For nearly 60 hours he had not slept, for 24 he had not eaten, and during the whole of that time he was the soul of the whole performance, the axis upon which the whole operation turned. A terrible fever took possession of him. A deathly pallor succeeded to his usual high color. In an atmosphere so intensely hot that no one could live beside him, he felt his limbs tremble and his teeth chatter as if he were amid the snows of Lapland. His companions remarked his condition and drew near to him. He tried to resist, to deny that he was beaten, for in his eyes it was a disgrace to yield even before the impossible. But at last he was fain to confess that his strength was failing him. Fortunately, the fusion was nearly accomplished. The most difficult part of the operation was past, and what remained to be done was mere mechanical work. He called Pagolo. Pagolo did not reply. But the workmen shouted his name in chorus, and he at last appeared. He said that he had been praying for the successful issue of the casting. "This is no time to pray," cried Benvenuto, and the Lord said, "He who works prays." "This is a time for work, Pagolo. Hark ye, I feel that I am dying, but whether I die or not, my Jupiter must live. Pagolo, my friend, to thee I entrust the management of the casting. Sure that thou canst do it as well as I, if thou wilt. Understand, Pagolo, the metal will soon be ready. Thou canst not mistake the proper degree of heat. When it is red, thou wilt give a sledge-hammer to Herman, and one to Simon Lagosha. My God, what was I saying? Ah, yes. Then they must knock out the 2 plugs of the furnace. The metal will flow out, and if I'm dead, you will tell the king that he promised me a boon, and that you claim it in my name, and that it is, oh my God, I no longer remember. What was I to ask the king? Ah, yes, Ascanio, Seigneur de Nessel, Colombe, the provost's daughter, Dorbeck, Madame d'Etampes. Ah, I am going mad. Benvenuto staggered and fell into Herman's arms, who carried him off like a child to his room, while Pagolo, entrusted with the superintendence of the work, gave orders for it to go on. Benvenuto was right. He was going mad, or rather a terrible delirium had taken possession of him. Scotzone, who doubtless had been praying as Pagolo had, hurried to his side, but Benvenuto continued to cry, "I am dying. I am dying. Ascanio, Ascanio, what will become of Ascanio?" 1,000 delirious visions were crowding in upon his brain. Ascanio, Colombe, Stefana, all appeared and disappeared like ghosts. In the throng which passed before his eyes was Pompeo the goldsmith, whom he slew with his dagger, and the keeper of the post-house at Siena, whom he slew with his arquebus. Past and present were confounded in his brain. How it was Clement VII who detained Ascanio in prison. Again it was Cosmo I who sought to force Colombe to marry Dorbeck. Then he would appeal to Queen Eleonora, thinking he was addressing Madame d'Etampes, and would implore and threaten her by turns. Then he would make sport of poor weeping Scotzone, and bid her beware lest Pagolo should break, his neck clambering around on the cornices like a cat. Intervals of complete prostration would succeed these paroxysms, and it would seem as if he were at the point of death. This agonizing state of affairs endured 3 hours. Benvenuto was in one of his periods of torpor when Pagolo suddenly rushed into the room, pale and agitated, crying, "May Jesus and the Virgin help us, Master, for all is lost now, and we can look nowhere but to heaven for help." Worn out, half-conscious, dying as he was, these words, like a sharp stiletto, reached the very bottom of his heart. The veil which clouded his intellect was torn away, and, like Lazarus rising at the voice of the Lord, he rose upon his bed, crying. Who dares to say that all is lost when Benvenuto still lives? "Alas, I, Master," said Pagolo. "Double traitor," cried Benvenuto, "is it written that thou shalt forever prove false to me? But never fear. Jesus and the Virgin whom you invoked just now are at hand, to bear aid to men of good will and punish traitors." At that moment he heard the workmen lamenting and crying, "Benvenuto! Benvenuto! He is here! He is here!" cried the artist, rushing from his room, pale of face, but with renewed strength and clearness of vision. "Here he is, and woe to them who have not done their duty." In 2 hounds Benvenuto was at the foundry. He found all the workmen, whom he had left so full of vigor and enthusiasm, in a state of utter stupefaction and dejection. Even Herman the Colossus seemed to be dying of fatigue. He was tottering on his legs and was compelled to lean against one of the supports of the roof, which remained standing. "Now listen to what I say," cried Benvenuto in an awful voice, falling into their midst like a thunderbolt. "I don't as yet know what has happened, but I swear to you beforehand that it can be remedied, whatever it may he. Upon my soul it can. Now that I am present, obey me on your lives. But obey passively, without a word, without a gesture, for the first man who hesitates I will kill. So much for the ill-disposed. I have but one word to say to those who are disposed to do their duty. The liberty and happiness of Ascanio, your companion of whom you are all so fond, will follow the successful issue of this task. To work! With that Cellini approached the furnace to form his own opinion of what had taken place. The supply of wood had given out, and the metal had cooled, so that it had turned to cake, as the professional phrase goes. Benvenuto at once determined that the disaster could be repaid. Pagolo's watchfulness had relaxed in all likelihood, and he had allowed the heat of the fire to abate. The thing to be done was to make the fire as hot as ever, and to reduce the metal to a liquid state once more. Wood, cried Benvenuto, wood. Go look for wood wherever it can possibly be found. Go to the baker's, and buy it by the pound if necessary. Bring every stick of wood that there is in the house to the smallest chip. Break in the doors of the Pettinesel, her man, if Dame Perini doesn't choose to open them. Everything in that direction is lawful prize, for it's an enemy's country. Wood, wood. To set the example, Benvenuto seized an axe and attacked the 2 posts which were still standing. They soon fell with the last remnants of the roof, and Benvenuto at once pushed the whole mass into the fire. At the same time his comrades returned from all directions laden with wood. Ah! Cried Benvenuto, now are you ready to obey me? Yes, yes, cried every voice. Yes, we will do whatever you bid us do, so long as we have a breath of life in our bodies. Select the oak then, and throw on nothing but oak at first. That burns more quickly, and consequently will repair the damage sooner. Immediately oak began to rain down upon the fire, and Benvenuto was obliged to cry enough. His energy infected all his comrades. His orders, even his gestures, were understood and executed on the instant. Pagolo alone muttered from time to time between his teeth, "You are trying to perform impossibilities. Master, it is tempting Providence." To which Cellini's only reply was a look which seemed to say, "Never fear, we have an account to settle hereafter." Meanwhile, notwithstanding Pagolo's sinister predictions, the metal began to fuse anew, and to hasten the fusion Benvenuto at intervals threw a quantity of lead into the furnace, stirring up the lead and copper and brass with a long bar of iron, so that, to borrow his expression, the metal corpse began to come to life again. At sight of the progress that was making, Benvenuto was so elate that he was unconscious of fever or weakness. He too came to life once more. At last the metal began to boil and seethe. Benvenuto at once opened the orifice of the mold and ordered the plugs of the furnace to be knocked out, which was done on the instant. But, as if this immense work was to be a veritable combat of titans to the end, Benvenuto perceived, as soon as the plugs were removed, not only that the metal did not run freely enough, but that there was some question as to whether there was enough of it. Thereupon, with one of those heaven-sent inspirations which come to none but artists, he cried, "Let half of you remain here to feed the fire, and the rest follow me." With that he rushed into the house, followed by 5 of his men, and an instant later they all reappeared, laden with silver plate, pewter, bullion, and pieces of work half completed. Benvenuto himself set the example, and each one cast his precious burden into the furnace, which instantly devoured everything: bronze, lead, silver, rough pig metal, and beautiful works of art, with the same indifference with which it would have devoured the artist himself if he had thrown himself in. Thanks to this reinforcement of fusible matter, the metal became thoroughly liquefied, and, as if it repented of its momentary hesitation, began to flow freely. There ensued a period of breathless suspense, which became something very like terror when Benvenuto perceived that all the bronze did not reach the orifice of the mold. He sounded with a long rod and found that the mold was entirely filled without exhausting the supply of metal. Thereupon he fell upon his knees and thanked God. The work was finished which was to save Ascanio and Colombe. Now would God permit that the result should fulfill his hopes? It was impossible to know until the following day. The night that followed was, as can readily be imagined, a night of agony, and, worn out as Benvenuto was, he slept for a very few moments only, and his sleep even for those few moments was far from being restful. His eyes were hardly closed before real objects gave place to imaginary ones. He saw his Jupiter, the king of the gods in beauty as well as power, as shapeless and deformed as his son Vulcan. In his dream he was unable to understand this catastrophe. Was it the fault of the mold? Was it the fault of the casting? Had he made a miscalculation? Or was destiny making sport of him? At the sight his temples throbbed furiously, and he awoke with his heart jumping and bathed in perspiration. For some time his mind was so confused that he could not separate fact from vision. At last, however, he remembered that his Jupiter was still hidden in the mold, like a child in its mother's womb. He recalled all the precautions he had taken. He implored God not only to make his work successful, but to do a merciful deed. Thereupon he became somewhat calmer, and fell asleep again, under the weight of the never-ending weariness which seemed to have laid hold on him forever, only to fall into a second dream as absurd and as terrifying as the first. Day broke at last, and with its coming Benvenuto shook himself clear of all symptoms of drowsiness. In an instant he was on his feet and fully dressed, and hastened at once to the foundry. The bronze was evidently still too hot to be exposed to the air, but Benvenuto was in such haste to ascertain what he had still to fear, or what he might hope, that he could not contain himself, and began to uncover the head. When he put his hand to the mold, he was so pale that one would have thought him at the point of death. "Are you still sick, master?" inquired a voice, which he recognized as Hermann's. "You would do much better to stay in your bed." "You are wrong, Hermann, my boy," said Benvenuto, amazed to find him astir so early, "for I should die in my bed. But how happens it that you are out of bed at this hour?" "I was taking a walk," said Hermann, blushing to the whites of his eyes. "I like much to walk. Shall I help you, master?" "No, no," cried Benvenuto. "No one but myself is to touch the mold. Wait, wait." And he began gently to uncover the head. By a miraculous chance, there was just the necessary amount of metal. If it had not occurred to him to throw all his silver plate and other objects into the furnace, the head would have been missing and the casting a failure. Fortunately, the head was not missing, and was wonderfully beautiful. The sight of it encouraged Benvenuto to expose the other portions of the body one after another. Little by little the mold fell away like bark, and at last Jupiter, freed from head to foot from his trammels, appeared in all the majesty befitting the sovereign of Olympus. In no part of the work had the bronze betrayed the artist, and when the last morsel of clay fell away, all the workmen joined in a shout of admiration, for they had come out one by one and gathered about Cellini, who did not even notice their presence. So absorbed was he by the thoughts to which this complete success gave rise. But at the shout, which made him too a god, he raised his head and said with a proud smile, "We shall see if the King of France will refuse the first boon asked by the man who has made such a statue." The next instant, as if he repented his first impulse of pride, which was entirely characteristic of him, he fell upon his knees, and with clasped hands rendered thanks to the Lord aloud. As he was finishing his prayer, Scott's ran out to say that Madame Hack Aubrey desired to speak to him in private, having a letter from her husband, which he could hand to none but Benvenuto. Benvenuto made Scott's repeat the name twice, for he had no idea that the student was in the hands of a lawful wife. He obeyed the summons nonetheless, leaving his companions swollen with pride in their master's renown. Pagolo, meanwhile, on scrutinizing the statue more closely, observed that there was an imperfection in the heel, some accident having prevented the metal from filling every part of the mold. Chapter 19, Jupiter and Olympus. On the same day that Benvenuto removed his statue from the mold, he sent word to Francois I that his Jupiter was cast, and asked him on what day it was his pleasure that the king of Olympus should appear before the king of France. Francois replied that his cousin, the emperor, and he would hunt in the forest of Fontainebleau on the following Thursday, and that he need do nothing more than have his statue transported to the grand gallery of the chateau on that day. The reply was very short. It was evident that Madame d'Etampes had strongly prejudiced the king against his favorite artist. But Benvenuto, was it through pride or confidence in God, said simply, with a smile, "It is well." It was Monday. Benvenuto caused the Jupiter to be loaded upon a wagon, and rode beside it, not leaving it for an instant, lest some mishap might befall it. On Thursday, at 10 o'clock, statue and artist were at Fontainebleau. To anyone who saw Benvenuto, though it were only to see him ride by, it was evident that pride and radiant hope were triumphant in his heart. His conscience as an artist told him that he had executed a chef d'oeuvre, and his honest heart that he was about to perform a meritorious action. He was doubly joyous, therefore, and carried his head high, like a man who, having no hatred in his heart, was equally without fear. The king was to see his Jupiter, and could not fail to be pleased with it. Montmorency and Poyet would remind him of his promise. The emperor and the whole court would be present, and Francois could not do otherwise than as he had given his word to do. Madame d'Etampes, with less innocent delight, but with quite as much ardent passion, was maturing her plans. She had triumphed over Benvenuto at the time of his first attempt to confound her by presenting himself at her own hotel and at the Louvre. The first danger was safely past, but she felt that the king's promise to Benvenuto was a second equally great danger, and it was a purpose, at any cost, to induce his majesty to disregard it. She therefore repaired to Fontainebleau one day in advance of Cellini, and laid her wires with a profound feminine craft which in a case almost amounted to genius. Cellini was destined very soon to feel its effects. He had no sooner crossed the threshold of the gallery where his Jupiter was to be exhibited than he felt the blow, recognized the hand that had dealt it, and stood for a moment overwhelmed. This gallery, ordinarily resplendent with paintings by Rosso, which were in themselves enough to distract the attention from almost any masterpiece, had been embellished during the last 3 days by statues sent from Rome by Primaticcio. That is to say, the marvels of antique sculpture, the types sanctified by the admiration of 20 centuries, were there before him, challenging comparison, crushing all rivalry. Ariadne, Venus, Hercules, Apollo, even Jupiter himself, the great Olympian Jove, ideal figures, dreams of genius, eternities in bronze, formed, as it were, a supernatural assemblage which it was impious to approach, a sublime tribunal whose judgment every artist should dread. There was something like profanation and blasphemy in the thought of another Jupiter insinuating himself into that Olympus, of Benvenuto throwing down the gauntlet to Phidias, and, notwithstanding his trust in his own merit, the devout artist recoiled. Furthermore, the immortal statues had taken possession of all the best places, as it was their right to do, and there was no place left for Cellini's poor Jupiter but some dark corner which could only be reached by passing under the stately and imposing glances of the ancient gods. Benvenuto stood in the doorway with bowed head, and with an expression in which sadness and artistic gratification were mingled. Messiah Antoine Le Macon, he said to the king's secretary, who stood beside him, I ought to and will send my Jupiter back instantly. The disciple will not attempt to contend with the masters. The child will not attempt to contend with his parents. My pride and my modesty alike forbid. Benvenuto, replied the secretary, take the advice of a sincere friend. If you do that, you are lost. I tell you this between ourselves, that your enemies hope to discourage you, and then to allege your discouragement as a proof of your lack of skill. It will be useless for me to make excuses for you to the king. His Majesty, who is impatient to see your work, would refuse to listen, and, with Madame d'Etampes continually urging him to do it, would withdraw his favor from you forever. She anticipates that result, and I fear it. It's with the living, not with the dead, Benvenuto, that you have to contend. You are right, Messiah, the goldsmith rejoined, and I understand you perfectly. Thank you for reminding me that I have no right to have any self-esteem here. That's all right, Benvenuto, but let me give you one more bit of advice. Madame d'Etampes is too fascinating today not to have some perfidious scheme in her head. She took the king and the emperor off for a ride in the forest with irresistible playfulness and charm. I am afraid, for your sake, that she will find a way to keep them there until dark. Do you think it? Cried Benvenuto, turning pale. Why, if she succeeds in doing that, I am lost, for my statue would then have to be exhibited by artificial light, which would deprive it of half its merit. Let us hope that I am mistaken, said Le Macon, and see what comes to pass. Cellini waited in painful suspense. He placed his Jupiter in as favorable a light as possible, but he did not conceal from himself the fact that its effect would be comparatively slight by twilight, and that after nightfall it would be positively bad. The Duchess's hatred had reckoned no less accurately than the artist's skill. She anticipated in 1541 a trick of the critics of the 19th century. Benvenuto watched the sun sink toward the horizon with despair at his heart, and listened eagerly to every sound without the chateau. Except for the servants, the vast structure was deserted. 3 o'clock struck. Thenceforth the purpose of Madame d'Etampes could not be mistaken, and its success was beyond question. Benvenuto fell upon a chair, utterly crushed. All was lost, his renown first of all. That feverish struggle, in which he had been so near succumbing, and which he had already forgotten because he had thought that it made his triumph show, would have no other result than to put him to shame. He gazed sorrowfully at his statue, around which the shadows of night were already beginning to fall, and whose lines began to appear less pure. Suddenly an inspiration came to him. He sprang to his feet, called little Jehan, whom he had brought with him, and rushed hastily from the gallery. Nothing had yet occurred to suggest the king's return. Benvenuto hurried to a cabinet maker in the town, and with his assistance and that of his workmen made, in less than an hour, a stand of light-colored oak, with 4 rollers, which turned in every direction, like casters. He trembled now lest the king should return too soon, but at 5 o'clock the work was completed, night had fallen, and the crowned heads had not returned to the chateau. Madame d'Etampes, wherever she was in a fair way to triumph. In a very short time Benvenuto had the statue in place upon the almost invisible stand. Jupiter held in his left hand the sphere representing the world, and in his right, a little above his head, the thunderbolt, which he seemed to be on the point of launching into space. Amid the tongues of the thunderbolt the goldsmith concealed a lamp. These preparations were hardly completed when a flourish of trumpets announced the return of the king and the emperor. Benvenuto lighted the lamp, stationed little Jehan behind the statue, by which he was entirely concealed, and awaited the king's coming, not without trepidation, evidenced by the violent beating of his heart. 10 minutes later the folding doors were thrown wide open, and Francois appeared, leading Charles V by the hand. The Dauphin, Dauphine, the King of Navarre, and the whole court followed the 2 monarchs. The provost, his daughter, and Dorbeck were among the last. Colombe was pale and dejected, but as soon as she espied Cellini, she raised her head, and a smile of sublime confidence appeared upon her lips and lighted up her face. Cellini met her glance with one which seemed to say, "Have no fear. Whatever happens, do not despair, for I am watching over you." As the door opened, little Jehan, at a signal from his master, gave the statue a slight push, so that it moved softly forward upon its smoothly rolling stand, and, leaving the antique statues behind, went to meet the king, so to speak, as if it were alive. Every eye was at once turned in its direction. The soft light of the lamp falling from above produced an effect much more agreeable than daylight. Madame d'Etampes bit her lips. "Methinks, sire," said she, "that the flattery is a little overdone, and that it was for the king of earth to go to meet the king of heaven." The king smiled, but it was easy to see that the flattery did not offend him. As his wont was, he forgot the artist for his art, saved the statue half the journey by walking to meet it, and examined it for a long time in silence. Charles V, who was by nature an astute politician rather than a great artist, although he did one day, in a moment of good humor, pick up Titian's pencil, Charles V and the courtiers, who were not entitled to an opinion, waited respectfully to hear that of Francois before pronouncing their own. There was a moment of silent suspense, during which Benvenuto and the Duchess exchanged a glance of bitter hatred. Suddenly the king cried, "It is beautiful. It is very beautiful. And I confess that my expectations are surpassed." Thereupon every one overflowed in compliments and extravagant praise, the emperor first of all. "If one could conquer artists like cities," said he to the king, "I would declare on you instantly to win this one, my cousin." "But, after all," interrupted Madame d'Etampes, in a rage, "we do not even look at the beautiful antique statues a little farther on, which have somewhat more merit, perhaps, than our modern gewgaws." The king thereupon walked toward the antique statues, which were lighted from below by the torches, so that the upper portions were in shadow. They were beyond question much less effective than the Jupiter. "Phidias is sublime," said the king, "but there may be a Phidias in the age of Francois and Charles V, as there was in the age of Pericles." "Oh, we must see it by daylight," said N. bitterly. "To appear to be is not to be, an artificial light is not out. And what is that veil? Is it to conceal some defect? Master Cellini, tell us frankly." She referred to a very light drapery thrown over the statue to give it more majesty. Thus far Benvenuto had remained beside his statue, silent and apparently as cold as it. But at the Duchess's words, he smiled disdainfully, shot lightning from his black eyes, and, with the sublime audacity of a heathen artist, snatched the veil away with his powerful hand. He expected that the Duchess would burst forth with renewed fury, but by an incredible exertion of her willpower, she smiled with ominous affability and graciously held out her hand to Cellini, who was amazed beyond measure by this sudden change of tactics. "I was wrong," she said aloud, in the tone of a spoiled child. "You are a great sculptor, Cellini. Forgive my critical remarks. Give me your hand, and let us be friends henceforth. What say you?" She added in an undertone, with extreme volubility, "Think well of what you are about to ask, Cellini. Let it not be the marriage of Colombe and Ascanio, or I swear that Colombe, Ascanio, and yourself, all three, are undone forever." "And suppose I request something else, Madam," said Benvenuto in the same tone. "Will you second my request?" "Yes," said she, eagerly, "and I swear that, whatever it may be, the king will grant it." "I have no need to request the king's sanction to the marriage of Colombe and Ascanio, for you will request it yourself, Madam." The Duchess smiled disdainfully. "What are you whispering there?" said Francois. "Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes," Benvenuto replied, "was obliging enough to remind me that your Majesty had promised to grant me a boon in case you were content with my work. And the promise was made in my presence, sire," said the constable, coming forward. "In my presence and Chancelier Poet's. Indeed, you bade my colleague and myself remind you." "True, constable," interposed the king, good-humoredly. "True, if I fail to remember myself, but I remember famously, on my word. So your intervention, while it is perfectly agreeable to me, is quite useless. I promised Benvenuto to grant whatever boon he might ask when his Jupiter was cast. Was not that it, constable? Have I a good memory, Chancellor? It is for you to speak, Master Cellini. I am at your service, but I beg you to think less of your own merit, which is immense, than of our power, which is limited. We make no reservations, saving our crown and our mistress." "Very good, sire," said Cellini. "Since your Majesty is so well disposed toward your unworthy servitor, I will ask for the pardon of a poor student, who fell into a dispute upon the Quai du Châtelet with the Vicomte de Marmagne, and in self-defense passed his sword through the Viscount's body." Everyone marveled at the moderation of his request, and Madame d'Etampes most of all. She gazed at Benvenuto with an air of stupefaction, and as if she thought that she could not have heard aright. "By Mahomet's belly," exclaimed Francois, "you do well to invoke my right of pardon in that matter, for I heard the Chancellor himself say yesterday that it was a hanging affair." "Oh, sire," cried the Duchess, "I intended to speak to you myself concerning that young man. I have had news of Marmagne, who is improving, and who sent word to me that he sought to quarrel. And the student, what is the student's name, Master Benvenuto?" "Jacques Aubry, Madame la Duchesse." "And the student," continued Madame d'Etampes, hurriedly, "was in no wise in the wrong. And so, sire, instead of rebuking Benvenuto or cavilling at him, grant his request promptly, lest he repent of having been immodest." "Very well," said Francois. "What you desire shall be done, master. And as he gives twice who gives quickly, so says the proverb, let the order to set this young man at liberty be dispatched tonight. Do you hear, my dear Chancellor?" "Yes, sire, and your Majesty shall be obeyed." "As to yourself, Master Benvenuto," said Francois, "come to me on Monday at the Louvre, and we will adjust certain matters of detail in which you are interested, and which have been somewhat neglected of late by my treasurer." "But your Majesty knows that admission to the Louvre." "Very good, very good. The person who gave the order can rescind it. It was a war measure, and as you now have none but friends at court, everything will be re-established upon a peace footing." "As your Majesty is in a granting mood," said the Duchess, "I pray you to grant a trifling request which I prefer, although I did not make the Jupiter." "No," said Benvenuto in an undertone, but you have often acted the part of Danae. What is your request? Said Francois, who did not hear Benvenuto's epigram. Say on Madame la Duchesse, and be sure that the solemnity of the occasion can add nothing to my desire to be agreeable to you. Very well. Sire, your Majesty might well confer upon Messiah d'Estorville the great honor of signing on Monday next a marriage contract of my young friend, Mademoiselle d'Estorville, with Comte d'Aubec. Why, I should be conferring no favor upon you by so doing, rejoined the king, but I should afford myself a very great pleasure, and should still remain your debtor, I swear. So it is agreed, sire, for Monday, asked the Duchess. For Monday, said the king. Madame la Duchesse, said Benvenuto, under his breath, do you not regret that the beautiful lily you ordered Ascanio to execute is not finished, that you might wear it upon such an occasion? Of course I regret it, was the reply, but it's impossible, for Ascanio is in prison. Very true, but I am free. I will finish it and bring it to Madame la Duchesse. Oh, upon my honor, if you do that I will say. You will say what, Madame? I will say that you are a delightful man. She gave her hand to Benvenuto, who gallantly imprinted a kiss upon it, after asking the king's permission with a glance. At that moment a slight shriek was heard. What is that? The king asked. Sire, I ask your Majesty's pardon, said the provost, but my daughter is ill. Poor child, murmured Benvenuto. She thinks that I have abandoned her. Chapter 28, Prudent Marriage. Benvenuto would have returned to Paris the same evening, but the king was so persistent that he could not avoid remaining at the chateau until the following morning. With the rapidity of conception and promptness of decision which were characteristic of him, he determined to arrange for the next day the denouement of a transaction which he began long before. It was a collateral matter which he wished to have off his hands altogether before devoting himself entirely to Ascanio and Colombe. He remained at the chateau to sup on that evening and until after breakfast on the Friday, and not until noon did he set out on his return journey, accompanied by little Jehan, after taking leave of the king and Madame d'Etampes. Both were well mounted, and yet, contrary to his wont, Cellini did not urge his horse. It was evident that he did not wish to enter Paris before a certain hour, and it was 7 o'clock in the evening when he alighted at Rue de la Harpe. Furthermore, instead of betaking himself at once to the Hotel de Nesle, he called upon one of his friends named Guido, a physician from Florence, and when he had made sure that his friend was at home and could conveniently entertain him at supper, he ordered little Jehan to return alone, to say that he had remained at Fontainebleau and would not return until the next day, and to be ready to open the door when he should knock. Little Jehan at once set out for the Hotel de Nesle, promising to abide by his instructions. The supper was served, but before they took their places at the table, Cellini asked his host if he did not know some honest and skillful notary whom he could send for to prepare a contract that could not be assailed. He recommended his son-in-law, who was immediately summoned. He arrived as they were finishing their supper, some half-hour later. Benvenuto at once left the table, closeted himself with him, and bade him draw up a marriage contract, leaving the names in blank. When they had read and reread the contract, as drawn up, to make sure that there was no flaw in it, Benvenuto paid him handsomely, put the contract in his pocket, borrowed from his friend a second sword of just a length of his own, put it under his cloak, and, as it had become quite dark, started for the Hotel de Nesle. When he reached his destination, he knocked once, but though he knocked very gently, the door immediately opened. Little Jehan was at his post. Cellini questioned him. The workmen were at supper and did not expect him until the morrow. He bade the child maintain the most absolute silence as to his arrival, then crept up to Catherine's room, to which he had retained a key, entered softly, closed the door, concealed himself behind the hangings, and waited. After a short time, he heard a light footstep on the staircase. The door opened a second time, and Scotzone entered, lamp in hand. She took the key from the outside, locked the door, placed the lamp on the chimneypiece, and sat down in a large armchair, so placed that Benvenuto could see her face. To his vast astonishment, that face, formerly so open and joyous and animated, was sad and thoughtful. The fact was that poor Scotsone was in the throes of something very like remorse. We have seen her when she was happy and thoughtless. Then Benvenuto loved her. So long as she was conscious of that love, or rather that kindly feeling in her lover's heart, so long as the hope of becoming the sculptor's wife someday was present like a golden cloud in all her dreams, so long she maintained herself at the level of her anticipations, and made atonement for her past by her love. But as soon as she discovered that she had been deceived by appearances, and that what she had mistaken for passion on Cellini's part was at most a mere whim, she descended the ladder of hope round by round. Benvenuto's smile, which had made that faded heart blossom anew, was taken from her, and the heart lost its freshness once more. With her childish light-heartedness, her childish purity had gradually vanished. Her old nature, powerfully assisted by ennui, gently recovered the upper hand. A newly painted wall keeps its colors in the sun and loses them in the rain. Scotsone, abandoned by Cellini for some unknown mistress, was no longer held to him save by a remnant of her pride. Pagolo had long paid court to her. She spoke to Cellini of his love, thinking that his jealousy would be aroused. Her expectation was not realized. Cellini, instead of losing his temper, began to laugh, and, instead of forbidding her to see Pagolo, actually ordered her to receive him. Thereafter she felt that she was entirely lost. Thereafter she abandoned her life to chance with a former indifference, and let it blow about in the wind of circumstances like a poor, fallen, withered leaf. Then it was that Pagolo triumphed over her indifference. After all was said, Pagolo was young. Pagolo, aside from his hypocritical expression, was a handsome youth. Pagolo was in love, and was forever repeating to her that he loved her, while Benvenuto had long since ceased to tell her so. The words, "I love you," are the language of the heart, and the heart always feels the need of speaking that language more or less ardently with someone. Thus, in a moment of idleness, of anger, perhaps of illusion, Scotsone had told Pagolo that she loved him. She had told him so without really loving him. She had told him so with Cellini's image in her heart and his name upon her lips. Then it immediately occurred to her that the day might come when Cellini, weary of his mysterious, unavailing passion, would return to her, and, if he found her constant, notwithstanding his express orders, would reward her devotion, not by marriage, for the poor girl had lost her last illusion in that regard, but by some remnant of esteem and compassion which he might take for a resurrection of his former love. It was such thoughts as these which made Scotsone sad and thoughtful, and caused her to feel remorse. In the midst of a silent reverie, she started and raised her head. She heard a light step on the stairway, and the next moment a key was rapidly turned in the lock, and the door opened. "How did you come in? Who gave you that key? Pagolo?" she cried, rising from her chair. "There are only two keys to that door. One is in my possession, and the other in Cellini's." "Ah, my dear Catherine," laughed Pagolo, "you a capricious creature. Sometimes you open your door to a fellow, and again you keep it closed. And when one attempts to enter by force, even though you have given him a right to do it, you threaten to call for help. So you see I had to resort to stratagem." "Oh, yes. Tell me that you stole the key from Cellini, without his knowledge. Tell me that he doesn't know you have it, for if he gave it to you I should die of shame and chagrin." "Set your mind at rest, my lovely Catherine," said Pagolo, locking the door, and sitting down near the girl, whom he forced to a seat beside him. "No, Benvenuto doesn't love you, it is true, but is like those misers who have a treasure which they make no use themselves, but which they won't allow anybody else to touch. No, I made the key myself. He who can do great things can do small things. Tell me if I love you, Catherine, when my hands, which are accustomed to making pearls and diamonds bloom on golden stalks, consented to shape an ignoble piece of iron. It is true, wicked one, that the ignoble piece of iron was a key, and that the key unlocked the door of paradise." With that, Pagolo would have taken Catherine's hand, but, to the vast amazement of Cellini, who did not lose a word or a gesture of the scene, Catherine repulsed him. Well, said Pagolo, "is this one likely to last long? Pray." "Look you, Pagolo," said Catherine, in a melancholy tone, which went to Cellini's heart. "I know that when a woman has once yielded, she has no right to draw back afterward. But if the man for whom she has been so weak has a generous heart, when she says to him that she was acting in good faith at the time because she had loss of reason, but that she was mistaken, it is that man's duty, believe me, not to take an unfair advantage of a momentary error. Well, Pagolo, I tell you this, I yielded to you, and yet I did not love you. I loved another, and that other Cellini. Despise me you may, indeed you ought, but torment me no more, Pagolo. Good, exclaimed Pagolo. Good. You arranged the matter marvelously well, upon my word. After the time you compel me to wait for the favor with which you now reproach me, you think that I will release you from a definite engagement which you entered into of your own free will? No, no. And when I think that you are doing all this of Benvenuto, for a man who is twice your age or mine, for a man who doesn't love you, for a man who despises you, for a man who treats you as a courtesan. Stop, Pagolo, stop, cried Scotzone, blushing with shame and jealousy and rage. Benvenuto doesn't love me any more. That is true, but he did love me once, and he esteems me still. Very good. Why doesn't he marry you, as he promised to do? Promised? Never. No, Benvenuto never promised to make me his wife. For if he had promised, he would have done it. I aspired to mount so high as that. The aspiration led me to hope that it might be so, and when the hope had once taken shape in my heart, I could not confine it there. It overflowed, and I boasted of a mere hope as if it were a reality. No, Pagolo, no, continued Catherine, letting her hand fall into the apprentice's with a sad smile. No, Benvenuto never promised me aught. Then, see how ungrateful you are, Scotzone, cried Pagolo, seizing her hand, and mistaking what was simply a mark of dejection for a return to him. You repulse me, who have promised you and offered you all that Benvenuto, by your own admission, never promised or offered you, while I am convinced that if he were standing there, he who betrayed you, you would freely make to him a confession you so bitterly regret having made to me, who love you so dearly. Oh, if he were here, cried Scotzone, if he were here, Pagolo, you would remember that you betrayed him through hatred, while I betrayed him because I loved him, and you would sink into the ground. Why so? Demanded Pagolo, bold as a lion because he believed Benvenuto to be far away. Why so, if you please? Hasn't every man the right to win a woman's love when that woman doesn't belong to another? If he were here, I would say to him, you abandoned Catherine, poor Catherine, who loved you so well. She was in despair at first, until she fell in with a kind-hearted, worthy fellow, who appreciated her at her true worth, who loved her, and who promised her what you would never promise her, to make her his wife. He has inherited your rights, and that woman belongs to him. Tell me, Catherine, what reply your Cellini could make to that. None at all, said a stern, manly voice behind the enthusiastic Pagolo. Absolutely none at all. At the same instant a powerful hand fell upon his shoulder, nipped his eloquence in the bud, and threw him to the floor, as pale and terrified as he had been boastful and rash a moment before. It was a strange picture, Pagolo on his knees, bent double, with colourless cheeks, and deadly terror depicted on his features. Scotzone, half risen from her chair, motionless and dumbfounded, like a statue of astonishment, and lastly, Benvenuto standing with folded arms, a sword in its sheath in one hand, a naked sword in the other, with an expression in which irony and menace struggled for the mastery. There was a moment of awful silence, Pagolo and Scotzone being equally abashed beneath the master's frown. Treachery, muttered Pagolo. Treachery. Yes, treachery on your part, wretch, retorted Cellini. You asked to see him, Pagolo, said Scotzone. Here he is. Yes, here he is, said the apprentice, ashamed to be thus treated before the woman he was so anxious to please. But he is armed, and I have no weapon. I have brought you one, said Cellini, stepping back and throwing down the sword he held in his left hand at Pagolo's feet. Pagolo looked at the sword, but made no movement. Come, said Cellini, pick up the sword and stand up yourself. I am waiting. A duel? Muttered the apprentice, whose teeth were chattering with terror. Am I able to fight a duel on equal terms with you? Very well, said Cellini, passing his weapon from one hand to the other. I will fight with my left hand, and that will make us equal. I fight with you, my benefactor, you, to whom I owe everything. Never, never. A smile of profound contempt overspread Benvenuto's face, while Scotsone recoiled without seeking to conceal the disgust which showed itself in her expression. You should have remembered my benefactions before stealing from me the woman I entrusted to your honor and Ascanio's, said Benvenuto. Your memory has come back to you too late. On guard, Pagolo. On guard. No, no, murmured the coward, falling back upon his knees. As you refuse a fight like an honest man, said Benvenuto, I propose to punish you as a scoundrel. He replaced his sword in its sheath, drew his dagger, and walked slowly toward the apprentice without the slightest indication either of anger or compassion upon his impassive features. Scotsone rushed between them with a shriek, but Benvenuto, without violence, with a motion of his arm as irresistible as that of a bronze statue endowed with life, put her aside, and the poor girl fell back half dead upon a chair. Benvenuto walked on toward Pagolo, who receded as far as the wall. There the master overtook him, and said, putting his dagger to his throat, Commend your soul to God. You have 5 minutes to live. Mercy, cried Pagolo in an inarticulate voice. Do not kill me. Mercy, mercy. What? Said Cellini. You know me, and, knowing me, seduced a woman who belonged to me. I know all. I have discovered everything, and you hope that I will spare you. You are laughing at me. Pagolo, you are laughing at me. Benvenuto himself laughed aloud as he spoke, but it was a strident, terrible laugh, which made the apprentice shudder to his marrow. Master, master, cried Pagolo, as he felt the point of the dagger pricking his throat. It was she, not I. Yes, she led me into it. Treachery, cowardice, and slander. I will make a group of those 3 monsters some day, said Benvenuto, and it will be a hideous thing to see. She led you into it, you reptile. Do you forget that I was here and heard all that you said? Oh, Benvenuto, murmured Catherine, you know that he lies when he says that, do you not? Yes, yes, said Benvenuto. I know that he lies when he says that, as he lied when he said that he was ready to marry you. But never fear, he shall be punished for the double lie. Yes, punish me, cried Pagolo, but be merciful. Punish me, but do not kill me. You lied when you said that she led you into it. Yes, I lied. Yes, I'm the guilty one. I love her madly. And you know, master, what love will lead a man to do. You lied when you said that you were ready to marry her. No, no, master, then I didn't lie. So you really love Scotsone? Oh, yes, indeed I love her, replied Pagolo, realizing that the only way of lessening his guilt in Cellini's eyes was to attribute his crime to the violence of his passion. Yes, I love her. And you say again that you were not lying when you proposed to marry her. I was not lying, master. You would have made her your wife. If she had not belonged to you, yes. Very well, then take her, I give her to you. What do you say? You are joking, are you not? No, I never spoke more seriously. Look at me if you doubt it. Pagolo glanced furtively at Cellini, and saw plainly in his face that the judge might at any moment give place to the executioner. He bowed his head, therefore, with a groan. Take that ring from your finger, Pagolo, and put it on Catherine's. Pagolo passively obeyed the first portion of the order, and Benvenuto motioned to Scotsone to draw near. She obeyed. Put out your hand, Scotsone, continued Benvenuto. Again she obeyed. Now do the rest. Pagolo placed the ring upon Scotsone's finger. Now, said Benvenuto, that the betrothal is duly accomplished, we will pass to the marriage. Marriage, muttered Pagolo. We can't be married in this way. We must have notaries and a priest. We must have a contract, rejoined Benvenuto, producing the one prepared under his orders. Here is one already, in which the names only need to be inserted. He placed the contract upon a table, took up a pen, and handed it to Pagolo. Sign, Pagolo, said he, Sign. "Ah, I have fallen into a trap," muttered the apprentice. "Eh? What's that?" exclaimed Benvenuto, without raising his voice, but imparting to an ominous accent. "A trap? Where's the trap in this? Did I urge you to come to Scott's own room? Did I advise you to tell her that you wish to make her your wife? Very good. Make her your wife, Pagolo. And when you are her husband, our roles will be changed. If I come to her room, it will be your turn to threaten and mine to be afraid." "Oh, that would be too absurd," cried Catherine, passing from extreme terror to hysterical gaiety, and laughing aloud at the idea which the master's words evoked. Somewhat reassured by the turn Cellini's threats had taken, and by Catherine's peals of laughter, Pagolo began to look at matters a little more reasonably. It became plain to him that Cellini wished to frighten him into a marriage for which he felt but little inclination. He considered, therefore, that would be rather too tragic a termination of the comedy, and that he might perhaps, with a little resolution, make a better bargain. "Yes," he muttered, translating Scott's gaiety into words. "Yes, it would be very amusing, I agree, but unfortunately it cannot be." "What?" "It cannot be," cried Benvenuto, as amazed as a lion might be to find a fox demurring to his will. "No, it cannot be," Pagolo repeated. "I prefer to die. Kill me." The words were hardly out of his mouth when Cellini was upon him. Pagolo saw the dagger gleaming in the air and threw himself to one side, so swiftly and successfully that the blow which was intended for him simply grazed his shoulder, and the blade, impelled by the goldsmith's powerful hand, penetrated the wainscoting to the depth of several inches. "I consent," cried Pagolo. "Mercy, Cellini, I consent. I am ready to do anything." And while the master was withdrawing the dagger, which had come in contact with the wall behind the wainscoting, he ran to the table where the contract lay, seized a pen, and wrote his name. The whole affair had taken place so rapidly that Scott's had no time to take part in it. "Thanks, Pagolo," said she, wiping away the tears which terror had brought to her eyes, and at the same time repressing an inclination to smile. "Thanks, dear Pagolo, for the honor you consent to confer upon me. But it's better that we should understand each other thoroughly now. So listen to me. Just now you would have none of me, and now I will have none of you. I don't say this to mortify you, Pagolo, but I do not love you, and I desire to remain as I am." "In that case," said Benvenuto, with the utmost coolness, "if you won't have him Scott's he must die." "Why?" cried Catherine. "It is I who refuse him." "He must die," rejoined Benvenuto. "It shall not be said that men insulted me and went unpunished. Are you ready, Pagolo?" "Catherine," cried the apprentice. "Catherine, in heaven's name take pity on me. Catherine, I love you. Catherine, I will love you always. Sign, Catherine. Catherine, be my wife. I beg you on my knees." "Come, Scott's decide quickly," said Cellini. "Oh," said Catherine, pouting. "Tell me, master, don't you think you are rather hard on me, who have loved you so dearly, and who have dreamed of something so different? But," cried the fickle child, passing suddenly from melancholy to merriment once more, "mon Dieu, Cellini, see what a piteous face poor Pagolo is making. Oh, for heaven's sake, put aside that lugubrious expression, Pagolo, or I will never consent to take you for my husband. Really, you are too absurd." "Save me first, Catherine," said Pagolo. "Then we will laugh, if you choose." "Oh, well, my poor boy, if you really and truly wish it." "Yes, indeed I do. You know what I have been. You know what I am." "Yes, I know. You are not deceived in me." "No. You will not regret it." "No, no." "Then give me your hand. It's very ridiculous, and I hardly expected it. But no matter, I am your wife." She took the pen and signed, as a dutiful wife should do, below her husband's signature. "Thanks, Catherine, thanks," cried Pagolo. "You will see how happy I will make you." "If he is false to that promise," said Benvenuto, "write to me, Scott's own, and wherever I may be I will come in person to remind him of it." As he spoke, Cellini slowly pushed his dagger back into its sheath, keeping his eyes fixed upon the apprentice. Then he took the contract, folded it neatly, and put it in his pocket, and said to Pagolo, with a withering sarcasm which was characteristic of him, "Now, friend Pagolo, although you and Scott's own are duly married according to the laws of men, you are not in God's sight, and the Church will not sanctify your union until tomorrow. Until then your presence here would be in contravention of all laws, divine and human. Good night, Pagolo." Pagolo turned pale as death, but as Benvenuto pointed imperatively to the door, he backed out of the room. "No one but you, Cellini, would ever have had such an idea as that," said Catherine, laughing as if she would die. "Hark ye, my poor Pagolo," she said as he opened the door. "I let you go because the law requires it. But never fear, Pagolo, I swear by the blessed Virgin, that when you are my husband no man, not even Benvenuto himself, will find me anything but a virtuous wife. Oh, Cellini," she added gaily, when the door was closed, "you give me a husband, but relieve me of his presence today. It is so much time gained. You owed me this reparation." Chapter 21, Resumption of Hostilities. 3 days after the scene we have described, a scene of quite another sort was in preparation at the Louvre. Monday, the day appointed for signing the contract, had arrived. It was 11 o'clock in the morning when Benvenuto left the Hotel de Nesle, went straight to the Louvre, and with anxious heart but firm step, ascended the grand staircase. In the reception room, into which he was first ushered, he found the provost and Dorbeck, who were conferring with a notary in the corner. Colombe, pale and motionless as a statue, was seated on the other side of the room, staring into vacancy. They had evidently moved away from her so that she could not hear, and the poor child had remained where they placed her. Cellini passed in front of her, and let these words fall upon her bowed head. "Have courage, I am here." Colombe recognized his voice, and raised her head with a cry of joy. But before she had time to question her protector, he had already entered the adjoining room. An usher drew aside a tapestry portiere, and the goldsmith passed into the king's cabinet. Nothing less than these words of cheer would have availed to revive Colombo's courage. The poor child believed that she was abandoned and consequently lost. Messiah d'Esterville had dragged her thither, half dead, despite her faith in God and in Benvenuto. As they were setting out, she was conscious of such a feeling of despair at her heart that she implored Madame d'Etampes to allow her to enter a convent, promising to renounce Ascanio provided that she might be spayed Comte d'Ilbec. But the Duchess wanted no half victory. In order that her purpose might be attained, it was essential that Ascanio should believe in the treachery of his beloved, and so she sternly refused to listen to poor Colombe's prayers. Thereupon, Colombe summoned all her courage, remembering that Benvenuto bade her be strong and brave, even at the altar's foot, and with occasional sinkings of the heart allowed herself to be taken to the Louvre, where the king was to sign the contract at noon. There again her strength failed her for a moment, for but 3 chances now remained: to touch the king's heart with her prayers, to see Benvenuto arrive, or to die of grief. Benvenuto had come. Benvenuto had told her to hope, and Colombe's courage revived once more. On entering the king's cabinet, Cellini found Madame d'Etampes alone. It was all that he desired. He would have solicited the honor of seeing her had she not been there. The Duchess was thoughtful in her hour of triumph, and yet, with the fatal letter burned by herself, she was fully convinced that she had nothing to fear. But although she was reassured as to her power, she contemplated with dismay the perils that threatened her love. It was always thus with the Duchess. When the anxiety attendant upon her ambition was at rest, the ardent passions of her heart devoured her. Her dream, in which pride and passion were mingled, was to make Ascanio great while making him happy. But she knew now that Ascanio, although of noble origin, for the Gaddis, to which family he belonged, were patricians of long standing in Florence, aspired to no other glory than that of being a great artist. If his hopes were ever fixed upon anything, it was some beautifully shaped vase, or ewer, or statue. If he ever longed for diamonds or pearls, it was so that he might make of them, by setting them in chased gold, lovelier flowers than those which heaven waters with its dew. Titles and honors were nothing to him if they did not flow from his own talent, and were not the guerdon of his personal renown. What part could such a useless dreamer play in the active, agitated life of the Duchess? In the first storm, the delicate plant will be destroyed, with the flowers which it already bore and the fruit of which it gave promise. It might be that he would allow himself to be drawn into the schemes of his royal mistress through discouragement or through indifference. But in that case, a pale and melancholy shadow, he would live only in his memories of the past. Ascanio, in fine, appeared to the Duchesse d'Etampes, as he really was, an exquisite, fascinating personality. So long as he remained in a pure, untroubled atmosphere, he was an adorable child who would never become a man. He could devote himself to sentiments, but never to ideas. Born to enjoy the outpourings of a mutual affection, he would inevitably go down in the first terrific onset of the struggle for supremacy and power. He was a man needed to satisfy Madame d'Etampes' passion, but not to keep pace with her in her ambitious schemes. Such was the tenor of her reflections when Benvenuto entered. The clouds of a thought hovering about her darkened her brow. The two adversaries eyed each other narrowly. The same satirical smile appeared upon their lips at the same time. The glances they exchanged were twin brothers, and indicated that they were equally prepared for the struggle, and that the struggle would be a desperate one. Well and good. He is a rough fighter, thought, and whom it will be a pleasure to overcome, a foeman worthy of my steel. But today there are, in truth, too many chances against him, and there will be no great glory in overthrowing him. Beyond question, Madame d'Etampes, said Benvenuto to himself, you are a masterful woman, and more than one contest with a strong man has given me less trouble than this I have entered upon with you. You may be sure, therefore, that, while fighting courteously, I shall none the less fight with all the weapons at my disposal. There was a moment's silence while the combatants delivered themselves of these brief monologues aside. The Duchess was the first to break the silence. You are punctual, Master Cellini, said she. His Majesty has assigned Comte d'Aubecq's contract at noon, and it is now only 11:15. Permit me to make His Majesty's excuses. He is not behindhand, but you are beforehand. I am very happy, madam, that I arrived too early, as my impatience procures me the honor of a tete-a-tete with you, an honor I should have requested most urgently, had not chance, to which I return my thanks, anticipated my wishes. Good luck, Benvenuto, said the Duchess. Does defeat incline you to flattery? Not my own defeat, madam, but that of other persons. I have always considered it peculiarly meritorious to pay my court to one in disgrace, and here is the proof of it, madam. As he spoke, Benvenuto drew from beneath his cloak Ascanio's golden lily, which he had completed that morning. The Duchess exclaimed with wonder and delight. Never had her eyes beheld such a marvelous jewel. Never did one of the flowers found in the enchanted gardens of the 1001 Nights so dazzle the eyes of Peri or fairy. Ah! cried the Duchess, putting forth a hand to take the flower. You promised me, Benvenuto, but I confess that I did not rely upon your promise. Why should you not rely upon it, madam? Laughed Benvenuto. You insult me. Oh, if you had promised to perform a revengeful, instead of a gallant act, I should have been much more certain that you would redeem your promise punctually. Who told you that I did not promise both? Retorted Benvenuto, drawing back his hand, so that the lily was still in his control. I do not understand you, said the Duchess. Do you not think, said Benvenuto, pointing to the diamond shimmering in the heart of the flower, the diamond which he owed to the corrupting munificence of Charles V, that when mounted in the guise of a dewdrop, the earnest given to bind a certain bargain which is to set off the Duchy of Milan from France has a fine effect. You speak in enigmas, my dear goldsmith. Unfortunately, the king will soon be here, and I haven't time to guess them. I will tell you the answer. Then, it is an old proverb, verba volant, scripta manent, which, being interpreted, means what is written. Ah, that's where you are in error, my dear goldsmith. What is written is burned. So do not think to frighten me as you would a child, and give me the lily which belongs to me. One instant, madam, I ought to warn you that while it is a magic talisman in my hands, it will lose all its virtue in yours. My work is even more valuable than you think. Where the multitude sees only a jewel, we artists sometimes conceal an idea. Do you wish me to show you this idea? Madam, nothing is easier. Look, all that is necessary is to press this invisible spring. The stalk opens, as you see, and in the heart of the flower we find no annoying worm, as in some natural flowers and some false hearts, but something similar, worse it may be, the edition of a Duchesse d'Etampes, written with her own hand and signed by her. As he spoke, Benvenuto pressed the spring, opened the stalk, and took out the letter. He slowly unfolded it, and showed it, open, to the Duchess, pale with wrath and stricken dumb with dismay. You hardly expected this, did you, madam? Said Benvenuto, coolly, folding the letter once more, and replacing it in the lily. If you knew my ways, madam, you would be less surprised. A year ago I concealed a ladder in a statuette. A month ago I concealed a maiden in a statue. What was there that I could hide away in a flower today? A bit of paper, that was all, and that is what I have done. But that letter, cried the Duchess, that infernal letter I burned with my own hands. I saw the flame and touched the ashes. Did you read the letter you burned? No, mad woman that I was, I did not read it. That is too bad, for you will be convinced now that the letter of a grisette will make as much flame and ashes as the letter of a duchess. Why, then, Ascanio, the dastard, deceived me. Oh, madam, pray pause. Do not suspect that pure and innocent child, who, even if he had deceived you, would have done no more than turn against you the weapons you use against him. Oh, no, he did not deceive you. He would not purchase his own life or Colombe's by deceit. No, he was himself deceived. By whom? Pray tell me that. By a mere boy, a student, the same who wounded your trusty retainer, Vicomte de Mamaine, by one Jack Aubrey, in short, whom it is likely that the Vicomte de Mamaine has mentioned to you. Yes, murmured the Duchess. Yes, Mamaine did tell me that this student, this Jack Aubrey, was seeking to gain access to Ascanio in order to secure that letter. And it was after that you paid Ascanio a visit. But students are active, you know, and ours had already anticipated you. As you left the Hotel d'Etampes, he was creeping into his friend's cell, and as you entered it, he went out. But I didn't see him. I saw nobody. One doesn't think to look everywhere. If you had done so, you would, in due course, have raised a certain mat, and under that mat would have found a hole communicating with the adjoining cell. But Ascanio, when you entered he was asleep, was he not? Yes. Very good. During his sleep, Aubrey, to whom he had refused to give a letter, took it from his coat pocket and put a letter of his own in its place. You were misled by the envelope and thought that you were burning a note from Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes. Not so, madam. You burned an epistle penned by Mademoiselle Gervaise Perrette Popinot. But this Aubrey, who wounded Mamaine, this clown, who almost murdered a nobleman, will pay dear for his insolence. He is in prison and condemned to death. He is free, madam, and owes his freedom in great measure to you. How so? Why, who but he was a poor prisoner whose pardon you joined me in urging upon King Francois. Oh, insane fool that I was, muttered the Duchess, biting her lips till the blood ran. She looked Benvenuto squarely in the eye for a moment, then continued, in a panting voice, On what condition will you give me that letter? I think I have allowed you to guess. Madam, I am not skilled in guessing. Tell me. You must ask the king to bestow Colombe's hand upon Ascanio. Go to, rejoined and with a forced laugh. You little know the Duchesse d'Etampes, master goldsmith, if you fancy that my love will yield to threats. You did not reflect before answering me, madam. I stand by my answer, however. Kindly permit me to sit down unceremoniously, madam, and to talk plainly with you a moment, said Benvenuto, with a dignified familiarity peculiar to superior men. I am only an humble sculptor, and you are a great duchess. But let me tell you that, notwithstanding the distance which separates us, we were made to understand each other. Do not assume those queenly airs. They will have no effect. It is not my purpose to insult you, but to enlighten you, and your haughty manner is out of place because your pride is not at stake. You are a strange man, upon my word, said in, laughing in spite of herself. Say on, I am listening. I was saying, Madame la Duchesse, continued Benvenuto, coolly, that, despite the difference in our fortunes, our positions are almost the same, and that we could understand each other, and perhaps mutually assist each other. You cried out when I suggested that you should renounce Ascanio. It seemed to you impossible and mad, and yet I had set you an example, madam. An example? Yes, as you love Ascanio, I love Colombe. You? I loved her as I had never loved but once. I would have given my blood, my life, my soul for her, and yet I gave her to Ascanio. Truly a most unselfish passion, sneered the Duchess. Oh, do not make my suffering matter for raillery. Madam, do not mock at my agony. I have suffered keenly, but I realize that the child was no more made for me than Ascanio for you. Listen, madam, we are both, if I may be pardoned for the comparison, of those exceptional and uncommon natures which lead an existence of their own, have feelings and emotions peculiar to themselves, and rarely find themselves in accord with others. We both obey, madam, a sovereign idol, the worship of which has expanded our hearts and placed us higher than mankind. To you, madam, ambition is all in all. To me, art. Now our divinities are jealous, and exert their sway always and everywhere. You desired Ascanio as a crown. I desired Colombe as a Galatea. You loved as a duchess. I as an artist. You have persecuted. I have suffered. Oh, do not think that I wrong you in my thoughts. I admire your energy and sympathize with your audacity. Let the vulgar think what they will. From your point of view, it is a great thing to turn the world upside down in order to make a place for the person one loves. I recognize therein a strong and masterful passion, and I admire characters capable of such heroic crimes. But I also admire superhuman characters, for everything which eludes foresight, everything outside the beaten paths, has an attraction for me, even while I love Colombe. Madam, I consider that my domineering, unruly nature will be mated with that pure angelic soul. Colombe loved Ascanio, my harmless, sweet-natured pupil. My rough, vigorous temperament would have frightened her. Thereupon, in a loud, imperative tone, I bade my love hold its peace, and as it remonstrated, I called to my assistance my art divine, and by our united efforts we floored the rebellious passion and held it down. Then sculpture, my true, my only mistress, touched my brow with her burning lips, and I was comforted. Do as I have done, Madame la Duchesse. Leave these children to their angel loves and do not disturb them in their heaven. Our domain is earth, with its sorrows, its conflicts, and its intoxicating triumphs. Seek a refuge against suffering and ambition. Unmake empires to distract your thoughts. Play with the kings and masters of the world to amuse yourself. That would be well done, and I would applaud your efforts. But do not wreck the peace and happiness of these poor innocents, who love each other with such a pure, sweet love, before the face of God and the Virgin Mary. Who are you, Master Benvenuto Cellini? I do not know you, said the Duchess in blank amazement. Who are you? Vride are you, a man among men, as you are a woman among women, rejoined the goldsmith, laughing with his customary frankness. And if you do not know me, you see that I have a great advantage over you, for I do know you, madam. It may be so, said the Duchess, but it is my opinion that a woman among women loves better and more earnestly than a man among men, for she snaps her fingers at your superhuman abnegation and defends a lover with beak and claws to the last gasp. You persist, then, in refusing to give Ascanio to Colombe. I persist in loving him myself. So be it, but if you will not yield with good grace, beware. I am somewhat rough when I am roused, and may make you cry out a little in the melee. You have reflected fully, have you not? You refuse once for all your consent to the union of Ascanio and Colombe. Most emphatically, yes. Very good. To our posts, cried Benvenuto, for the battle is on. At that moment the door opened, and an usher announced the king. Chapter 22, A Love Match. Francois appeared on the threshold, giving his hand to Diane de Poitiers, with whom he had come from the bedside of his sick son. Diane, inspired by a hatred, had a vague feeling that her rival was threatened with humiliation, and did not choose to miss the gratifying spectacle. As for the king, he saw nothing, suspected nothing. He believed Madame d'Etampes and Benvenuto to be entirely reconciled, and as he saw them talking together when he entered, he saluted them both at once, with the same smile and the same inclination of the head. "Good morrow, my queen of beauty. Good morrow, my king of artists," he said. "What are you talking about so confidentially? You seem both to be deeply interested." "Mon Dieu, sire, we are talking politics," said Benvenuto. "And what particular subject exercises your faculties? Tell me, I beg." "The question which engrosses everybody at present, sire," continued the goldsmith. "Ah, the Duchy of Milan." "Yes, sire." "Well, what were you saying of it?" "We do not agree, sire. One of us maintains that the emperor might well refuse to give you the Duchy of Milan, and yet redeem his promise by giving it to your son Charles. Which of you makes that suggestion?" "I think that it was Madame d'Etampes, sire." The duchess became pale as death. "If the emperor should do that, it would be infamous treachery," said Francois. "But he'll not do it." "In any event, even if he does not do it," said Diane, joining in the conversation, "it will not be, I am assured, for lack of advice given him to that effect." "Given by whom?" cried the king. "By Mahomet's belly. I would be glad to know by whom." "Bon Dieu, do not be so disturbed, sire," rejoined Benvenuto. "We said that as we said other things, simple conjectures put forward by us in desultory talk. Madame la Duchesse and I are but bungling politicians. Sire, Madame la Duchesse is too much of a woman to think of aught beside her toilet, although she has no need to think of that. And I, sire, am too much of an artist to think of aught beside art. Is it not so, Madame la Duchesse?" "The truth is, my dear Cellini," said Francois, "that each of you has too glorious a part to play to envy others aught that they may have, even though it were the Duchy of Milan. Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes is queen by virtue of her beauty, and you are king by virtue of your talent." "King, sire." "Yes, king, and although you haven't, as I have, 3 lilies in your crest, you have one in your hand, which seems to me to be lovelier than any that ever blossomed in the brightest sunlight or upon the fairest field in all heraldry. This lily is not mine, sire. It belongs to Madame d'Etampes, who commissioned my pupil Ascanio to make it. But as he could not finish it, and as I realized Madame d'Etampes' desire to have so rich a jewel in her possession, I set to work myself and finish it, wishing with all my heart to make it the symbol of the treaty of peace which we ratified the other day in your Majesty's presence." "It is marvelously beautiful," said the king, putting out his hand to take it. "Is it not, sire?" rejoined Benvenuto, withdrawing it as if without design. "And the young artist, whose chef d'oeuvre it is, certainly deserves to be magnificently rewarded." "Such is my purpose," interposed the duchess. "I have in store for him a recompense which a king might envy him. But you know, madam, that the recompense to which you refer, splendid as it is not that upon which his heart is fixed. What would you have? Madam, we artists are whimsical creatures, and often the thing which would, as you say, arouse a king's envy, is viewed by us with disdainful eye." "Nevertheless," said Madame d'Etampes, as an angry flush overspread her face, "he must be content with what I have set apart for him, for I have already told you, Benvenuto, that I would accord him no other save at the last extremity." "Very well. You may confide to me what his wishes are," said Francois to Benvenuto, once more putting out his hand for the lily, "and if it's not too difficult a matter, we will try to arrange it." "Observe the jewel carefully, sire," said Benvenuto, placing the stalk of the flower in the king's hand. "Examine it in detail, and your majesty will see that any compensation whatsoever must fall short of the value of such a masterpiece." As he spoke, Benvenuto darted a keen glance at the duchess, But her self-control was so perfect that not a muscle of her face moved as she saw the lily pass from the artist's hand to the king's. "Tea is really miraculous," said the king. "But where did you find this superb diamond which glistens in the heart of the flower?" "I did not find it, sire," replied Cellini, with charming affability. "Madame d'Etampes furnished it to my pupil." "I was not aware that you owned this diamond. Madam, whence came it to your hands? Pray." "Why, probably from the place where most diamonds come from, sire, from the mines of Guzerat or Golconda. There is a long story connected with that diamond, sire, and if your majesty cares to hear it, I will tell it you. The diamond and I are old acquaintances, for this is the third time it has passed through my hands. In the first place, I set it in the tiara of our Holy Father, the Pope, where its effect was marvelous. Then, by order of Clement VII, I mounted it upon a missal which His Holiness presented to the Emperor Charles V, and as the Emperor desired to carry it constantly about him, as a resource doubtless in an emergency, I set the diamond, which is worth more than 1,000,000, in a ring, sire. Did not your majesty observe it on the hand of your cousin, the Emperor?" "Yes, I remember," cried the king. "Yes, on the day of our first interview he had it on his finger. How comes a diamond in your possession, Duchess?" "Yes, tell us," cried Diane, whose eyes shone with joy. "How came it about that a diamond of that value passed from the Emperor's hands to yours?" "If the question were put to you, madam," retorted Madame d'Etampes, "the answer would not be far to seek, assuming that you confess certain matters to any other than your confessor." "You do not answer the king's question, madam," rejoined Diane. "Yes," said Francois, "how comes a diamond in your possession?" "Ask Benvenuto," said Madame d'Etampes, hurling a last defiance at her enemy. "Benvenuto will tell you." "Tell me, then," said the king, and instantly I am weary of waiting. "Very good, sire," said Benvenuto. "I must confess to your majesty that at sight of this diamond strange suspicions awoke in my mind, as in yours. It was while Madame d'Etampes and myself were at enmity, you must know, and I should not have been sorry to learn some little secret which might injure her in your majesty's eyes. So I followed the scent, and I learned." "You learned?" Benvenuto glanced hastily at the Duchess, and saw that she was smiling. The power of resistance which he manifested pleased him, and, instead of putting an end to the struggle brutally with one stroke, he resolved to prolong it, like a athlete, sure of victory in the end, who, having fallen in with an antagonist worthy of him, resolves to display all his strength and all his skill. "You learned," the king repeated. "I learned that she purchased it of Manasseh, the Jew. Yes, sire, know this and govern yourself accordingly. It seems that since he entered France, your cousin, the Emperor, has scattered so much money along the road that he is reduced to putting his diamonds in pawn, and Madame d'Etampes, with royal magnificence, gathers in what the imperial poverty cannot retain." "Ah, by my honor as a gentleman, tea is most diverting," cried Francois, doubly flattered in his vanity as lover and in his jealousy as king. "But, fair lady," he added, addressing the Duchess, "methinks you must have ruined yourself in order to make such an acquisition, and it is for us to repair the disordered state of your finances. Remember that we are your debtor to the value of the diamond, for it is so magnificent that I am determined that it shall come to you from a king's hand at least, if not from an emperor's." "Thanks, Benvenuto," said the Duchess in an undertone. "I begin to believe, as you claim, that we were made to understand each other." "What are you saying?" cried the king. "Oh, nothing, sire. I was apologizing to the Duchess of my first suspicion, which she deigns to pardon, a favor which is a more generous on her part, in that the lily gave birth to another suspicion." "What was it?" demanded the king, while Diane, whose hate was too keen to allow her to be deceived by this comedy, devoured her triumphant rival with her eyes. Madame d'Etampes, so that she was not yet quit of her indefatigable foe, and a shadow of dread passed across her face, but it should be said, in justice to her courage, only to disappear immediately. Furthermore, she availed herself of the king's preoccupation, caused by Benvenuto's words, to try to gain possession of the lily, But Benvenuto carelessly placed himself between the king and her. What was the suspicion? Oh, the goldsmith said with a smile, it was so infamous that I am not sure that I shouldn't be ashamed of having had it, and that it would not add to my offense to be so shameless as to avow it. I must have an express command from your majesty before I should day. Day, Cellini. I command you, said the king. So be it. In the first place, said Cellini, I confess with an artist's candid pride that I was surprised to see Madame d'Etampes entrust the apprentice with a task which the master would have been happy and proud to execute for her. You remember my apprentice, Ascanio, sire? He is a charming youth who might venture to pose for Endymion, upon my word. Well, what then? Said the king, his brows contracting at the suspicion which began to gnaw his heart. This time it was evident that, for all her self-control, Madame d'Etampes was on the rack. In the first place, she read malicious curiosity in the eyes of Diane de Poitiers, and in the second place she was well aware that, while Francois might have forgiven treason to the king, he certainly would not forgive infidelity to the lover. However, as if he did not notice her agony, Benvenuto continued. I reflected upon the beauty of my Ascanio, and it occurred to me, forgive me, mesdames, if there was anything in the thought which seems to cast a reflection upon the French, but I am accustomed to the ways of our Italian princesses, who, in love, it must be confessed, are very weak creatures. It occurred to me that a sentiment which had little connection with art. Master, said Francois, frowning darkly, reflect before you speak. I apologized beforehand for my temerity and asked to be permitted to hold my peace. I bear witness to that, said Diane. You yourself bade him speak, sire, and now that he has begun. It is always time to stop, said Madame d'Etampes, when one knows that what one is about to say is a falsehood. I will stop if you choose, madame, said Benvenuto. You know that you have but to say the word. Yes, but I choose that he shall continue. You are right, Diane. There are matters here which must be probed to the bottom. Say on, monsieur, say on, said the king, keeping his eyes fixed upon the sculptor and the duchess. My conjectures were taking a wide range when an incredible discovery opened a new field to them. What was it? Cried the king and Diane de Poitiers in the same breath. I am getting in very deep, whispered Cellini to the duchess. Sire, said she, you do not need to hold a lily in your hand to listen to this long discourse. Your majesty is so accustomed to hold a scepter in a firm grasp that I fear the fragile flower may be broken in your fingers. As she spoke, the duchess, with one of those smiles which belonged to her alone, put out her hand to take the jewel. Forgive me, Madame la Duchesse, said Cellini, but as a lily plays an important part throughout my story, permit me to enforce my words with ocular demonstration. The lily plays an important part in the story you have to tell, master, cried Diane, snatching the flower from the king's hand with a movement swift as thought. In that case, Madame d'Etampes is right. For if the story is at all what I suspect, it is much better that the lily should be in my hands than in yours, sire, for, purposely or not, your majesty might, by some uncontrollable impulse, break it. Madame d'Etampes became terribly pale, for she deemed herself lost. She hastily seized Benvenuto's hand, and her lips opened to speak, but almost immediately she thought better of it. Her hand let the artist fall, and her lips closed again. Say what you have to say, she muttered through her clenched teeth. If you dare, she added in so low a tone that Benvenuto alone could hear. Yes, and measure your words, my master, said the king. And do you, madam, measure your silence, said Benvenuto. We are waiting, cried Diane, unable to restrain her impatience. Fancy, sire, and you, madam, fancy that Ascanio and Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes corresponded. The duchess looked about to see if there were not at hand some weapon with which he could silence the goldsmith's tongue forever. Corresponded, echoed the king. Yes, corresponded, and the most extraordinary thing is that the subject of this correspondence between Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes and the humble carver's apprentice was love. The proofs? Master. You have proofs, I trust, cried the king, in a rage. Oh, mon Dieu. Yes, sire, replied Benvenuto. Your Majesty must understand that I should not have allowed myself to form such suspicions without proofs. Produce them instantly, then, said the king. When I say that I have them, I am in error. Your Majesty had them a moment since. Aye, cried the king, and Madame de Poitiers has them now. Aye, cried Diane. Yes, rejoined Benvenuto, who, amid the king's wrath and the hatred and terror of the two most powerful women in the world, was perfectly cool and complacent. Yes, for the proofs are in the lily. In the lily, cried the king, snatching the flower from the hands of Diane de Poitiers, and examining it with a careful scrutiny, in which love of art had no share. In this lily. Yes, sire, in the lily, Benvenuto repeated. You know that it is so, madam, he continued in a meaning tone, toward the gasping duchess. Let us come to terms, she whispered. Colombe shall not marry Dorbeck. That is not enough, returned Cellini. Ascanio must marry Colombe. Never, exclaimed Madame d'Etampes. Meanwhile, the king was turning the fatal lily over and over in his fingers, his suspense and wrath being the more poignant in that he dared not express them openly. The proofs are in the lily. In the lily, he repeated, but I can see nothing in the lily, because your Majesty does not know the secret of opening it. There is a secret. Show it me, Messiah, on the instant, or rather. Francois made a movement as if to crush the flower, but both women cried out, and he checked himself. Oh, sire, it would be a pity, cried Diane. Such a charming toy. Give it to me, sire, and I promise you that if there is a secret, I will find it. Her slender, active fingers, to which hatred lent additional subtlety, passed over all the rough places on the jewel, felt in all the hollows, while the Duchesse d'Etampes, half fainting, followed with haggard eyes her investigations, which for a moment were without result. But at last, whether by good luck or a rival's instinct of divination, Diane touched the precise spot on the stalk. The flower opened. The two women cried out again at the same moment, one with joy, the other with dismay. The Duchess darted forward to tear the lily from Diane's hand, but Benvenuto held her back with one hand, while with the other he showed her the letter which he had taken from its hiding place. A swift glance at the flower showed her that the hiding place was empty. I agree to everything, said the Duchess, completely crushed and too weak to maintain such a contest. On the gospel, said Benvenuto. On the gospel. Well, master, said the king, impatiently, where are the proofs? I see a recess very cleverly hollowed out in the stalk, but there is nothing within it. No, sire, there is nothing, said Benvenuto. True, but there might have been something, suggested Diane. Madam is right, said Benvenuto. Master, cried the king through his clenched teeth, do you know that it may be dangerous for you to prolong this pleasantry, and that stronger men than you have repented playing with my anger? For that reason I should be in despair were I to incur it, sire, rejoined Cellini, without losing his composure. But there is nothing in the present circumstances to arouse it, for I trust your Majesty did not take my words seriously. Should I have dared to bring so grave an accusation so lightly? Madame d'Etampes can show you the letters this lily contained, if you are curious to see them. They are in fact concerned with love, but it is the love of my poor Ascanio for a noble demoiselle, a passion which at first seems insane and impossible, doubtless, but my Ascanio, like the true artist he is, fancying that a beautiful jewel falls not far short of equaling in value a beautiful maiden, applied to Madame d'Etampes as to a special providence, and made this lily his messenger. Now, you know, sire, that Providence can do anything, and you will not be jealous of this particular one, I fancy, since, while doing a kindly action, she attributes part of the credit to you. That is the solution of the enigma, sire, and if all the beating about the bush I have indulged in has offended your Majesty, I pray you to forgive me in consideration of the familiarity to which you are being graciously pleased to admit me. This quasi-academic harangue changed the face of a phase. As Benvenuto went on, Diane's brow grew dark, while the wrinkles vanished from that of Madame d'Etampes, and the king resumed his smiling good humor. When Benvenuto had finished, Forgive me, "Fair Duchess," said Francois, "for having dared to suspect you for an instant, tell me what I can do to redeem my offense and earn my forgiveness." "Grant the request which Madame la Duchesse d'Etampes is about to make, as your Majesty heretofore granted the one that I made." "Speak for me, Master Cellini, since you know what it is that I wish," said the Duchess with better grace than Cellini would have thought possible. "Very well. Since Madame la Duchesse appoints me to be her mouthpiece, sire, you must know that she desires your all-powerful intervention in favor of poor Ascanio's passion." "Yes, yes," laughed the king. "I agree with all my heart to assist in making the comely apprentice a happy man. What is the name of his sweetheart?" "Colombe d'Estorville, sire." "Colombe d'Estorville," cried Francois. "I pray your Majesty to remember that it is Madame d'Etampes who proffers this request. Come, Madame, add your prayers to mine," he added, causing a corner of the letter to protrude from his pocket. "For if you are silent much longer, His Majesty will think that you make the request solely from a desire to oblige me." "Is it true that you desire this marriage, Madame?" inquired Francois. "Yes, sire," murmured Madame d'Etampes. "I do desire it earnestly." The adverb was extracted by a fresh exhibition of the letter. "But how do I know," said the king, "that the provost will accept for his son-in-law a nameless, penniless youth?" "In the first place, sire," Benvenuto replied, "the provost, being a loyal subject, will surely have no other will than his king's. In the second place, Ascanio is not nameless. He is a Gatto Gatti, and one of his ancestors was Podesta of Florence. He is a goldsmith, it is true, but in Italy it is no disgrace to belong to that guild. Furthermore, even if he could boast of no ancient nobility, as I am at liberty to insert his name in the letters patent which have been forwarded to me by your Majesty's directions, he will be a nobleman of recent creation. Oh, think not that it requires any sacrifice on my part to resign in his favor. To reward my Ascanio is to reward myself twice over. So it is settled, sire, that he is Seigneur de Nesle, and I will not let him want for money. He may, if he will, lay aside his profession, and by a company of lances, on appointment at court. I will provide the funds. And we shall look to it, you may be sure, that your generosity does not lighten your purse too much. Then I may consider, sire, Ascanio Gatto Gatti, Seigneur de Nesle, let it be," cried the king, laughing heartily. The certainty that Madame d'Etampes was faithful to him had put him in a joyous humor. "Madame," said Cellini, in an undertone, "you cannot in conscience leave the Seigneur de Nesle at the Châtelet. It was well enough for Ascanio." Madame d'Etampes called an officer of the guards and whispered a few words, the concluding ones being these: "In the king's name." "What are you doing, Madame?" demanded Francois. "Madame d'Etampes is simply sending a messenger for the bridegroom that is to be, sire," interposed Cellini. "Where Madame d'Etampes, who knew the king's kindness of heart, bade him await your Majesty's pleasure." 15 minutes later, the door of the apartment opened, in which were assembled Colombe, the provost, Dorbeck, the Spanish ambassador, and almost the whole court, except Mermain, who was still confined to his bed. An usher cried, "The king!" Francois I entered, leading Dine de Poitiers, and followed by Benvenuto, upon one of whose arms was leaning the Duchesse d'Etampes, and on the other Ascanio, each of them being as pale as the other. At the announcement made by the usher, all the courtiers turned, and all were paralyzed for a moment when they saw this strange group. Their astonishment redoubled when the king, stepping aside to allow the sculptor to pass in front of him, said in a loud voice, "Master Benvenuto, take our place for the moment and our authority. Speak as if you were the king, and be obeyed as a king should be." "Beware, sire," replied the goldsmith. "In order to fill your place fittingly, I propose to be magnificent." "Go on, Benvenuto," said Francois laughingly. "Every magnificent stroke will be a bit of flattery from me." "Very good, sire. That puts me at my ease, and I will praise you as much as I can. Do not forget," he continued, "all you hear me, that the king is speaking by my mouth. Messrs. Les not Iries. You have prepared the contract which His Majesty deigns to sign? Insert the names of the contracting parties. The two notaries seized their pens and made ready to write the names in the two copies of the contract, one of which was to remain in the archives and the other in their office. Of the one part, continued Cellini, the noble and puissant demoiselle Colombe d'Esterville. Colombe d'Esterville, repeated the notaries, mechanically, while the auditors listened in open-mouthed astonishment. Of the other part, continued Cellini, the most noble and puissant Ascanio Gatti, Seigneur de Nesle. Ascanio Gatti, cried the provost and Dolbeck in the same breath. A mere artisan, added the provost bitterly, turning toward the king. Ascanio Gatti, Seigneur de Nesle, repeated Benvenuto, unmoved, upon whom His Majesty bestows letters of naturalization and the office of superintendent of the royal chateaux. If His Majesty so commands, I will obey, said the provost. But Ascanio Gatti, continued Benvenuto, out of regard for whom His Majesty grants to Messiah Robert d'Esterville, provost of Paris, the title of chamberlain. Sire, I am ready to sign, said d'Esterville, vanquished at last. Mon Dieu, murmured Colombe, falling back into a chair. Is not all this a dream? And what of me? Cried Dolbeck. As for you, rejoined Cellini, continuing his royal functions, as for you, Comte Dolbeck, I spare the inquiry which I should be justified in ordering into your conduct. Clemency is a kingly virtue, no less than generosity. Is it not, sire? But here are the contracts, all prepared. Let us sign, messrs, let us sign. He plays the king to perfection, cried Francois, as happy as a monarch on a vacation. He passed the pen to Ascanio, who signed with a trembling hand. Ascanio then passed the pen to Colombe, to whose assistance Madame Diane had gone in pure kindness of heart. The hands of the lovers met, and they almost swooned. Next came Madame Diane, who passed the pen to the Duchesse d'Etampes, who passed it to the provost to Dolbeck, and Dolbeck to the Spanish ambassador. Below all these great names, Cellini wrote his own in a firm, distinct hand. And yet he was not the one who had made the least painful sacrifice. After writing his name, the Spanish ambassador drew nigh the Duchess. Our plans still hold, Madame, he asked. Mon Dieu, she replied, do what you choose. What matters France or the world to me? The Duke bowed. As he resumed his place, his nephew, a young and inexperienced diplomat, remarked, So it is the Emperor's purpose that not the King of France, but his son, shall be Duke of Milan. Neither the one nor the other will be, replied the ambassador. Meanwhile other signatures were being affixed. When every one had written his name as a subscriber to the happiness of Colombe and Ascanio, Benvenuto walked up to the king and knelt upon one knee before him. Sire, said he, having issued commands as king, I now prefer a request as your majesty's humble and grateful servant. Will your majesty deign to grant me one last favor? Say on, Benvenuto, say on, returned Francois, who was in a granting mood, and who discovered in you that it was a prerogative of royalty wherein, taken for all in all, a king finds the most pleasure. What do you desire? To return to Italy, sire, said Benvenuto. What does this mean? Cried the king. You wish to leave me when you have so many masterpieces still in hand for me. I'll not have it. Sire, replied Benvenuto, I will return, I give you my word. But let me go. Let me see my country once more, for I feel the need of it just now. I do not talk of my suffering, he continued, lowering his voice and shaking his head sadly, but I have many causes of sorrow which I could not describe, and nothing but the air of my native land can heal my wounded heart. You are a great and generous king, to whom I am deeply attached. I will return, sire, but let me go now and be cured in the bright sunlight of the south. I leave with you Ascanio, my brain, and Pagolo, my hand. They will suffice to carry out your artistic dreams until my return, and when I receive the soft kisses of the breezes of Florence, my mother, I will return to you, my king, and death alone shall part us. Go if you will, said Francois. Sadly, it is fitting that art should be free as the swallows. Go. He gave Benvenuto his hand, which the artist kissed with all the fervor of heartfelt gratitude. As they withdrew, Benvenuto found himself by the Duchess's side. "Are you very angry with me, madam?" said he, slipping into her hand a fatal letter which, like a magic talisman, had accomplished impossibilities. "No," said the Duchess, overjoyed to have it in her possession at last, "and yet you defeated me by means." "Go to," said Benvenuto. "I threatened you with them, but do you think I would have used them?" "God in heaven," cried the Duchess, as if the light had suddenly come to her. "That is what it is to have thought that you were like myself." The next day, Ascanio and Colombe were married in the chapel at the Louvre, and, notwithstanding the rules of etiquette, the young people obtained permission for Jacques Aubry and his wife to be present. It was a signal favor, but we must agree that the poor student had well merited it. Chapter 23, Marriage to Convenience. A week later, Hermann solemnly espoused Dame Perini, who brought him as a marriage portion 20,000 tours livres, and the assurance that he would soon be a father. We hasten to say that this assurance had much more to do with the honest German's determination than the 20,000 tours livres. On the evening following the marriage of Colombe and Ascanio, Benvenuto set out for Florence, despite the entreaties of the young husband and wife. During his stay in Italy, he cast a statue of Perseus, which still adorns the square of the old palace, and which was his most beautiful work, for no other reason, perhaps, than that he executed it at the period of his greatest sorrow. The end.